Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Finding the Alternative. I'm here today with Ricardo. Um, Ricardo, introduce yourself a little bit.
Hey everybody, my name is Ricardo Garate. I was a member of the WMSCOG in the city of Santee, in the area of San Diego, for about 7 years, and I came out last year. It's almost been a year now, in the month of March.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah. So how are you feeling now being a year out? Still fresh or still getting over things or how's it going?
Man, it feels great after 1 year. It's been getting better month by month. It was hard at the beginning, but
Right.
after a little while, you start to get back into your normal life, taking care of yourself, and start feeling better. It takes time though.
Right. Yeah, it does take time, but it's definitely worth it at the end of the day for sure. So, in this video, we're not going to go too much into Ricardo's story. I will post a link to his story from Great Light Studios. So that way, if you want to see a little bit more about Ricardo, about his story, how he came in and all that good stuff, I'll post a link down below. Give that a check out. Today, we're mostly just going to do kind of a Q&A between me and Ricardo. Just kind of give our thoughts about maybe our time in the WMSCOG, what they've taught, different mental blocks that maybe some members who are on the fence might be facing, and just kind of just have a open forum kind of with just a bunch of random questions that we might be useful to you, whether you're in the WMSCOG or you have friends or family in the WMSCOG. I think it's good information for everyone to have. So without further ado, let's just get right into it. So the one question I have for you, Ricardo, is why do you think members feel lonely when they come out of the WMSCOG?
Because you are lonely. Because one of the systems that the church has, one of the tactics that they use is isolation from the outside world. So when you're a member, um, at first you don't get asked for much. You kind of just, they take it easy on you. So you're asked to just kind of keep on service, study a little bit, and as time goes on, they start putting more and more demands on you, and basically they'll put on as many demands as you let them.
Right.
So there comes a time when all your life is in the church. There's nothing going on outside. You really don't. You lose connection with family and friends. Um, And then when you come out, when you realize what you've been doing and what you're falling into, and then you decide to leave, the people in the church who have become your only contacts, your only friends, and your closest family, they cut off contact with you because you're no longer a member. You They see you as becoming an opposition, I guess, or betraying them, walking away from the faith. And we're taught as members that if someone leaves, they're basically betraying God, and it's better if you cut off communications with them because they might, you know, hurt your faith. So you are very lonely. There's really, you really have no one to talk to about your issues because the members of the WMS, they won't listen to you if you try to, tell them what's going on.
Hmm.
Um, and the people outside, like your family and friends, they have a really hard time understanding what's going on because they haven't experienced it. So it is a very lonely time for people coming out. Um, so yeah, that's
What
that's
are what
probably
are
why.
what are some things that you think might help members not feel so lonely? Because I think when you come out, there's really nowhere to go, right? There's no handbook that's given to WMSCOG members like, hey, if you ever are in the WMSCOG, you want to leave, here's a step-by-step process of where to go, who to talk to, and how to do this, right? So, what would you recommend for somebody who is thinking about leaving and they, are afraid of feeling lonely and are afraid of feeling like an outcast? What would you recommend that what would you have liked somebody to do for you if you were on or had that frame of mind where you were about to leave and you were afraid of being alone and being cast out, which eventually, evidently, it will happen. It's just a matter of time.
Good question. I would say start taking care of yourself, because more likely than not, if you're an actual member who is devoted to the church, you've been putting off your health, your mental health, your finances, and really not doing anything that you really enjoy, like any hobbies or anything. So I would just tell the members who are coming out, if you feel whatever you need to feel in the moment, it's gonna hurt a lot, because you're gonna realize what they did to you, basically, and it's gonna be hard. But have be gracious to yourself, and be patient. Understand that it is a process, getting rid of all this indoctrination that you've been put through, and just kind of explore what it is that you like. Um, if there were hobbies that you walked away from, or you stopped practicing, you can get back into those. Try spending some time with old friends, catch up with them. You know, if they're willing to listen to you, talk to them about your experience in the church. It's gonna be a little healing. It's gonna do a little healing for you, and take it day by day. Try to enjoy the life that you just got back, and understand that it's a process. But at the end, I've seen all the members, or all the ex-members who I've spoken to, their quality of life improves dramatically, month by month, after they left this organization.
Yeah, so essentially you're saying reconnect with who you were before. Basically, if you like to, for instance, I was in a band, I like playing the drums. I know Ricardo. I see guitar in the back. He used to play guitar a lot.
What a worldly man you are.
You sinner. Just kidding. No. Um, no, but that's the kind of thing they do, right? They take these things that are just normal, right? That the Bible does not forbid in any way, shape, or form, right? The Bible does not forbid you going to college, doesn't forbid you getting a better job, it doesn't forbid you from playing instruments or living your dreams. I mean, of course, it forbids sin, right? So obviously, if your occupation is a sinful one, or your dream is a sinful dream, right? And we can all kind of figure out what those are. But if it's not that, then your dreams and hopes and your aspirations, they're not like God would be pleased for you to use your intelligence, use your talents that He gave you, right? And so I think finding something that would connect with your old self, like me playing the drums or you playing the guitar, or going to a place where you used to go with your family, or even just hobbies, find new hobbies, right? Hey, I've never tried this. I never had time to try this. Let's go try it. Being open-minded is a very healing thing, especially being out of the WMSCOG, because your mind was closed for, I mean, mine was almost 10 years. Yours was a little over 7 years. So having that mind of just not being afraid and just trying things, figuring out who you are, taking time for yourself, and opening up to everybody. Like I even told, so I run an insurance agency for my work, but I even tell some of my clients, like, hey, what happened? I was like, oh, I just came out of a cult. They sit down. I want to know everything. I'm just like, okay. I just tell them everything. So, I think being open about it is a way of processing it, because if you're not open about it and you keep it inside, I feel like the cult wins because you're not able to process it. They still have a hold on you in that sense. Um, but yeah, I think that's good. Just yeah, finding yourself again is definitely a healing thing. Um, did you ever, being in the WCOG, were you ever like when you were doing something, whether preaching or whatever the situation was, did you ever do anything that you thought maybe wasn't morally correct, or maybe it was shady, but you just did it anyway because it's for the gospel?
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah, I did. There's many examples that I could give. I guess one that comes to my mind kind of naturally is sometimes we would go out to eat after preaching, or things like that, with with the group that we had. In one instance, I went with my group at the time to preach somewhere. I don't remember where, probably a military base. That's where we would go very often. And then afterwards, we stopped to eat something somewhere, and I saw someone asking for money outside. He was a homeless man sitting outside with his sign, and I was gonna go, and I told my leader at the time. He was my unit leader. His name's Jose. And I told him, "Hey, I'm about to go. I'll be back. I'm gonna hand something to this man." And then he stopped me. He was like, "Oh, no, you don't have to give anything to anyone. They're in that situation because something is between them and God. You know, God put them there for a reason." And I stopped and I was like, "Oh, snaps! Like I read in the Bible that we're supposed to help those in need and we're supposed to, feed the poor and things like that. But I guess it doesn't apply here." So there was even though I knew the Bible says this, because this person who is my leader taught me, or at that moment was teaching me something different. I guess I just took him by his word and not help someone out who was in need. So contradicting, right, to the teachings of Jesus Christ. But many things many times you don't go to events that you're supposed to go to, like important family events. Could be weddings of friends. It could be funerals. If you care about the people in your life, you're gonna be at those events. But since you're a member of the WMSCOG and you're so involved in this, and you have so much fear of hell, you really can't give up a Sabbath service to attend any of these important events. So I knew that I was like, some part of me knew that I was like kind of like forsaking my family and friends for the church. Um, but I kept telling myself, "Oh, I'm doing it because I want to follow the commands of God," not knowing that those were actually the commands of God. So yeah.
Yeah, essentially what they do is they hold your family in a way like as a carrot in front of you because they say based off your righteousness they could be saved, right? How do you know? So that's why you do as much as you can for the church. Um, and yeah, you miss a lot of things. Like I miss my dad's 65th birthday because he had it on a Saturday, and the party time was during the evening worship service. So obviously I couldn't go because it's better for me to be there on the Sabbath than it was for me to be there for him physically, right? Because um, and that's something that I regret personally because that was the last birthday he ever had, right? He died a few days later. But I wasn't there because obviously I was keeping service. And so I always kind of think about, what was my dad thinking when everyone else was, at the birthday party, he's in the hospital hooked up to tubes and whatnot. But then his youngest son is nowhere to be found, doesn't even like acknowledge or anything because again, everything like physical birthdays, physical weddings, family, right? Family weddings, family birthdays, all these different things. I mean, you're taught that, oh, it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter. We don't know who our real family is. We don't know who our real, you know, whatever the case may be, our real friends are, etc. And so I thought being at the church was going to be a service to my dad, but I look at it from his perspective now and I'm like, man, the last birthday he ever had on earth, his youngest son forsook him, right? Um, and I never saw him alive. Again, he died a few days later from heart failure. And so these are the kind of things that you have to be aware of in the WMSCOG is these kind of things will happen, right? But I also want to say too that those members who are in there that these things may happen to, I know where your head's at because I know exactly how you feel. But let me just tell you, when you come out, there will be a lot of what's the word? A lot of things will come back to haunt you, and you will have to process, and you will have to work through these things. And I have to, I have to accept certain things that are hard. I have to accept certain things that happen, you know. I guess staying in part with this question here, kind of going off on a tangent. But there was one time I remember. Did you ever do Operation Infiltration? Does that sound familiar?
No, but I can kind of tell what it consists of just by the name of it.
So Operation Infiltration, it might have been called other things, but I remember we would go to those apartment complexes that had codes that you had to get to go into the apartment complexes. And I remember what we would do was we'd have one person stand by the door, and then we would wait for some unsuspecting person to walk by and be like, "Oh, I forgot my key," or "I forgot my key fob," or "I got locked out," or whatever the situation we made up. And they're like, "Oh, sure," and then boop, and then open it, and I'm like, "Oh, or thank you." Like I did this too, so let me just say me, right, so I don't get in trouble. But then I'd open the door, and then I'd walk in, and I would stop in the entrance, call right the driver of the car that has like six other people, and I'd open the door for them, and we go into the complex and preach. And I always just felt so uncomfortable doing that, but at the time I'm like, oh no, this is for the gospel, right? This is just my uncomfortableness is coming from my sinful nature, just my disobedience towards God or something like that. But now being out, it's like, no, that's just kind of not okay. But that's kind of my experience.
Yeah.
Obviously,
Going
everyone has
back
their
a
own
little
opinion.
bit, I'm sorry. Um, I just wanted to ask, by the way, thanks for sharing that about your dad. It's just sad how the cult convinces you that you're doing the right thing when very clearly, if you just use common sense, you're not doing the right thing. You know, you're abandoning those people who are close to you and who
Who
have
gave you
cared about you for
life?
so long. And I'm curious, did they, because I didn't attend my father's my father's funeral either, because they told me that it was better to be at the church praying for him. But did they ever use Matthew 8:22 with you, where they say, Jesus told them, "Follow me and let the dead bury their own dead"?
Oh yeah, they use that a lot. They use that for anything, right? They use that for
Yeah,
family who, and they use John 6 too, right? They say those who don't have the flesh and blood, what are they? They're dead, right? So they use all these verses to
yeah,
prove it's to create that artificial separation between you and the family. You're alive, right? And they can only live through you, but they're dead. So what are you going to learn from a dead person? Nothing. They can't speak, right? They kind of make these sort of nonsensical analogies. You're like, oh yeah, oh. But thankfully, I was actually able to go to my dad's funeral. I got approval, right? I had to get approval to go to my dad's funeral
wow,
because obviously, if I didn't get approval, I know that I would not have gone because I was so indoctrinated. And this was 2018, so this was I left in 20 September of 24, so that would have been you know 5 6 years ish. Um, so it happened 6 years. So I was fairly new. I was baptized 2015, so I mean I was still fairly new. Um, but still, even at that point, I was like, well, if they don't, I even told my mom, like, well, if I don't get approval, like, I can't come, right? And I
wow.
know for a fact that if I didn't get approval, I would not have gone because you don't
Adam,
go above the authority.
just think about that. Just look at it from the outside. Like you tell your friend, "Oh, I don't know if I'm gonna be at my dad's funeral because I don't know if the church is gonna approve of it, if they're gonna let me." Dude, anyone's gonna look at you like you're insane. Like you're in something that's not, healthy.
Yeah. And I couldn't even mourn really because when you go there, right, they tell you, oh, just everything they say, just ignore it or just think over it, right? Like when they're praying, pray over them, right? When they're talking, just think of how wrong it is. Like this is the actual instruction I got, right? So I couldn't even really mourn because, everyone's talking about my dad and, and heaven and stuff. And I'm just like in my head, like, you guys don't know what you're talking about. My dad's not in heaven. My dad's in hell and all this kind of stuff because that's what you're taught. And I'm like, you guys don't even know. You guys don't listen to me. Like, and they're praying to so my dad's LDS, right? My whole family's LDS, which is, to each their own. I'm just saying, just for context purposes. But they're all talking about like the Book of Mormon and stuff. And I'm just like, in my head, I'm just like, demonizing them like false prophets and all this stuff, because this is what I was taught to do, you know. And whenever they prayed and said anything about Jesus, I'm just thinking about how wrong they all are. And that's like, that's not how you mourn somebody. I couldn't mourn because I was so busy trying to figure out what was wrong with everybody's doctrine, what was wrong with everybody's prayer, what was wrong with everybody's verse, like all this stuff. So I couldn't really in the cult, I could never really mourn, right? Because obviously, like my dad passed away on a Friday. I was there the next Saturday, right? Keeping service as if nothing happened, right? No, you don't get time off. You don't get a break. You don't get, like, even when your dad or someone passes away, like you're expected to be at the next service. If he passes away Friday at 6 a.m. or Saturday at 6 a.m., you better be there at 9 a.m. Right? So wrap up what you got to do, because that's the culture.
Yeah.
Um,
And God
but
forbid that you show any kind of remorse or any kind of sadness or, any kind of,
you can't, because that
no.
reflects bad on the church. That reflects bad
Mm.
images on the church.
And you're
So
seen
you
as a
just,
complainer.
yeah, or you don't have faith, right? You have little faith. Excuse me.
You
So moving
forgot
on.
that you don't deserve anything good, and anything
Yeah,
bad that happens to you is well deserved in the church.
exactly.
So,
Exactly. Everything bad, it's you. Everything good, it's the church, right?
yeah.
So next question here, this kind of follows in line with what we're talking about. What are some ways the WMSCOG separates you physically, spiritually, and emotionally?
Well, let's separate those, right? Because
Yeah.
those are different things. But I would say physically, it's very easy to tell. You have to be at the church at all times. You can't, like, let's say yesterday, my family was having an event, my sister's birthday, or they're having a gender reveal, or something cool was going on in the family, right? I was not
Hmm.
gonna be there because I had to be in the church for all the services. Otherwise,
Right.
according to general pastor, I wouldn't be saved. I would
Yeah.
fall into hell. So this is one way that they do it. Also through the preaching meetings, or through the, what's it called, any kind of gospel activities that you do, especially the feast. Whenever you have to keep those feasts, like go to the church every day at 5 a.m. and at 8 p.m., man, I can only imagine the people who are not members and have like a spouse in the church. Shoot, I don't even spend time with them. These people are just going to and back from church. So it's like you really can't spend any quality time with your significant other and your family while you're a member of this church. So that's
And
how
when
they
you
do it
do, you're tired.
physically.
And when you do,
Yeah.
you're tired, right? You're too
You-
exhausted to really do anything.
You're not present.
Yeah. And when you go to the church too, they physically separate you, right? Like the women go to one place, the children go to another place, the men go to another place. And it's like that the whole day, right? It's not like, oh, it's just for certain. Like, no, you're separated the whole day. Every time you're in Zion for a service, there is actual physical separation between families.
Yeah, and you're forbidden to act like nobody's supposed to know that like you guys are a couple. Because
Yeah.
in the church, you're told to act like that, to see the other person as not your partner but your sister or brother, which is kind of weird. Yeah.
But I think that's on purpose too.
Yeah.
And even children to parents, right? You're not allowed to call mommy, daddy, it's brother or sister, right? Like, so my 7-year-old would call me brother Adam or something. And it's just like, oh, I never got used to that. I was just like, that's just, oh, it's just so wrong.
Yeah, I
Oh
bet.
man.
Yeah. Because they want
Okay,
to
so
have
moving on.
control. They want to be the
Yeah,
ones with the authority. So I mean, we
yeah,
can touch on like how they separate you spiritually and
yeah. That's what I
emotionally.
was gonna ask.
Because spiritually, they kind of put you against every other believer. You know, oh,
Yeah.
you're keeping Sunday. Oh, you don't have the truth. And then you gotta figure out in your mind how are you gonna be able to like introduce your doctrine to them so they can be one of the ones who follows God correctly, right?
Yep.
So I would say they create a lot of hostility between you and other believers. And it's funny
Yeah.
because the people who are actually walking with Jesus and who are following the actual gospel, you're trying to tell them that they're doing the wrong thing. Meanwhile, you're in a cult and you don't even know what you're talking about. It's funny. So I guess that's the division that they create, and I believe that's intentional too.
Yeah. Because there is no, oh, well, go talk to a pastor and see if he confirms the Sabbath or the Passover, or, that's forbidden. You don't do that. Like, what could you learn from them, right? Or, Sabbath, more than any theologian that's ever existed, right? I don't know if you ever heard that one, but
Oh yeah.
and I find that ironic too, because I think back on all the times I preached to people and they were telling me, no, you're saved by faith. No, Sunday's not this. No, like all these things that I was just so fortified and not processing. But now being out, I'm like, how did I miss all that? Like they were telling me the actual gospel the whole time, well, not every single time, because obviously you meet some people that are kind of out of their mind and maybe in some other cults per se that we
Another
don't even know
quote.
about. So and let me not say everyone, but majority of the people, especially if they're Christian, right? They were following actually what the Bible was literally telling you to do, but you're so fixed on the PowerPoints and you're so fixed on the little tiny things the cult feeds you that you can't even see any of that being in. Um, so yeah, I guess that's how they would separate spiritually. What about emotionally?
You're just not there. You're not present because you could be spending time with someone who's not in the church. You're really not gonna be trying to connect with them, trying to understand where they're at, what they need, what they enjoy, how they see life, because you're convinced that the church has convinced you that your current way of seeing life is the one and only correct one, and everyone else doesn't have truth and is mistaken. So you're not able to like bond with anyone because you're so concentrated on what is it that you need to do to bring them to the church, so they won't have to suffer forever. So it's really no, they don't really allow you to have that connection with the outside world. They want all of your connection, all of your close contacts and close interactions to be from people within the church. They tell you that those are your actual real family who you're gonna be spending eternity with in heaven, and whoever is like outside, family and friends who you've known before, those people are gonna go to hell, and you're not gonna see them again. So you really don't. You're kind of like from the very beginning taught to disassociate yourself from the people outside and become more associated with those inside.
Yeah, it's how I would describe it to somebody who's maybe not familiar with the WMSCOG is imagine you're a doctor and you have the cure for cancer, right? And you have this cure and everyone's sick, right? Your whole family is sick, dying of this cancer. But then you go to the your family and you're like, "Hey, I have this cure for your cancer." And then your family says, "No, I don't want it. No, I refuse to take this. No, I don't think this is going to work. I don't agree with this. Like, where is it? What is this thing that you're trying to give me?" That's kind of the mindset of how someone in this organization views their family, right? They think their family is these patients, right? These cancer patients with this incurable illness. And you, as a member, are the only one that can administer this serum, this cure, right? And so, what would you do in that case, right? If your family is rejecting you, right, and they have this incurable disease, which is death, sin, and the only cure is the WMSCOG and going and doing what they tell you to do. Naturally, you're going to say, well, if you don't want the cure and you're going to be lost to me at that point, eventually, I might as well just cut you off now because then it will hurt less later, right? So I think that's another way they separate you emotionally because they make you almost like, they say like, oh, everyone on the outside is dead. But actually, if you think about it, I felt dead inside being in the WCOG. Like I was so callous to everything. I was callous to natural disasters. I was callous to people losing their lives. I was callous to everything, right? Like I was callous to my own spouse. Like I was like, oh, we're just here. We're just here for the gospel. Like it doesn't matter how I treat you, right? It doesn't matter how much love we have or how much we build together. We're just here for the gospel, right? Or
Yeah.
with, family, it's like, well, they teach you that eventually you're going to see the destruction of your loved ones, right, on the last day. So it's like, well, I might as well just pretend like that already happened. So that way, when it does, I'm already prepared mentally for that to take place, right? And so that's a lot of the mindset of what's going on is you kind of become a psychopath. Like you become numb to emotions in general, right? Because you're taught that you can't follow your heart. The heart is deceitful. You can't use your thoughts. God's thoughts aren't your thoughts. You can't use your emotions, right? Because those are just inconveniences. That's a sinful nature, or whatever the situation may be. And so they really just that's that separation because again, in their eyes, you are a cancer patient. They're the only ones that can cure you, but you refuse to come to them. So they're just like, well, fine, I'll leave you to your devices then and find somebody else who will accept the cure for this. So that kind of gives people an insight of what's going on in the head of somebody who might not be familiar with this organization. So moving on, what do you think kept you in so long in WMSCOG?
The fear of hell. And I'm pretty sure, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that every single member is there because of that.
Wait, I
Because
thought it was the love of mother, though. I thought that's what kept people in.
man,
No? Okay.
I doesn't even know you exist. So, and that's for the majority of the members.
Only when you
I
don't
mean,
tithe, apparently.
if you give a good contribution, oh, she knows you exist, probably. But
Yeah.
other than that, probably not. She probably doesn't even have a clue I was ever there at that church. So it's
So you never got to
definitely
meet her.
no. I was invited to where I was proposed the opportunity to go to Korea. Mm, almost when I was even not that long in the church. I mean, I was always like very in from day one. Um, but no, I didn't take that opportunity. So she doesn't even have a clue I was there. But even when leaving, I never got a call from her. So she
Yeah.
just doesn't know that I was ever a member or that I even exist. So it's funny that you say that.
Yeah.
But definitely the fear of hell is amplified every single service by their words because they constantly say that the world is going to end very very soon and that all those who are not part of this organization are basically gonna rot and while they're still standing and they're gonna burn in hell forever and there's no escape. So you're like in a dilemma where it's like, well, I don't want to be here anymore. I'm miserable. But then again, if I leave, I'm gonna suffer forever. So the only way to not be tortured forever is to be tortured in this place mentally while you're alive. So that's what kept me in. But once I realized that it's a false gospel and there's nothing there, that they were just using really manipulation to keep me in, there's no reason to stay. There's no love in there, and they don't have the gospel. So yeah,
Yeah. And not only their words, but even the kids and were accustomed to seeing people burning in hell on the screen, like animations of people actually burning in hell, and that's what children watch as well. Um, being in that church, uh, so yeah, it's that constant fear and that constant. Because I remember, there was one time I think it was Mother's Word where she said, "Hey, basically the point was like the last 30 years of you doing good, it doesn't matter anymore, right? You need to do good from now too. That's what counts." And I think she also said something like, "What if you worked hard for 30 years, but then you took a day off, and that's the day Father comes? Like how shameful it would be." It's like that's when I was like, "Wait, what?" Like that's not unconditional love that or this mother's love that is all over the place, right? Through the love of mother this, the love of mother that. It's like, well, that's love? Like it's a pretty dark form of love, but I mean to each his own, I guess. So on that note, with world ending, right? That's kind of their main, I guess, their main premise of everything. Like it's the glue that keeps the puzzle together. So they teach the end of the world a lot every year for various reasons. One of the common things I come across, at least in my social media, was at least that keeps people in, is that the seal of God, and that this seal of God is supposedly going to keep them safe from the world ending, right? Even though maybe some, I've heard from some too, like, well, maybe these other teachings don't make sense, they're not biblical or whatever. But Passover, seal of God, world's going to end. I'd rather keep the Passover, even though some things may be questionable. What do you say to someone like that?
Well, it seems like this has become like a common practice in this church to just say that the end is going to come this year. Ahnsahnghong
Yeah.
himself, he had some unfulfilled end of the world prophecies there. All his followers thought that that they were gonna ascend with him, and he wasn't gonna die. Oh, just like today, like
Yeah.
everybody thinks that they're gonna ascend with Mother and that she's not gonna die. Well, I don't know if they're still hanging on to that belief. You know how they change their teachings and their doctrines. As they see it convenient, so they're probably doing a little work around that belief right now. But going back to what you asked, it looks like he set a standard, for this church. Now it's normal for them to say that the world is gonna end, soon or this year or the upcoming year. What's funny is that I heard that so long, and I was like, man, I thought it was gonna end like 2 years ago. In 2017, I heard that it was gonna end in 2018 because of the 100 years of Ahnsahnghong
Yep.
coming on this earth on the year 2022. Some brother, no, I think it was 2023. Towards the end, a brother named Washington was studying with me. He was my unit leader at the time, and he's basically at the end of the service. He goes like, "Guess what? Mother said that this year is the end. So you just have to worry about coming this year, and you'll be good." And in my mind, I was like, I mean, okay. It's not like I haven't heard that before. We'll see what happens, right? And surely enough,
Yeah.
2024 came, and the world wasn't gone. In the beginning of 2024, which is when I was starting to like really really doubt, at the end of the sermon that I attended, they were saying, "Let us work faithfully, and we'll be at the gates of heaven at the end of 2024." But guess what, Adam? It's 2025,
Wait,
and
what?
we're still here.
No
So,
way.
and I wouldn't be surprised if they're already saying that this year is gonna end for
Yeah,
some
because
reason.
2024 was like 60, right? Like something about 60, like 60 is meaningful. And I'm like, I've never heard 60 being meaningful ever, but okay. 60th year, it's meaningful, right? This is going to be it. Something's going to happen, right? Um, so here's my thought, and I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent here. So with the 144,000, they teach that, I mean, this might be helpful for some people who might not have come across this group. So they teach that there's 144,000 that are going to be sealed with this Passover by second coming Jesus, and those 144,000 are going to basically ascend to heaven alive, right? And that they are never going to taste death, essentially. So there's a couple of things I want to address here. First off, the seal is only given to 144,000, which is a problem because if you actually read the context of Revelation 5, 6, and 7, the seal of God is actually never explicitly said to be given to the great multitude, right? The seal is only placed on the 144,000. So the WMSCOG boasts a 3.7 million member count, which means that 1 out of 25 members, according to their own doctrine, is actually going to perish because only the 144,000 ascend alive, right? So it means 1 out of 25 is going to be able to ascend to heaven alive. And if they continue to grow, that number becomes more problematic, right? So and that's something that you see in the church. They're always constantly competition because it's like a rat race, but of like the most evil sort of prize. Like, hey, whoever wins the race doesn't get to die. right? It's that kind of a race, But even still, if you read Ahnsahnghong's book, and I'm gonna read it so that way I don't get in trouble. Let me just read it here. It says, and this is in Problems with the New Jerusalem, the Bride and Women's Veil, right? The Forbidden Book. If
Wait,
you care
you
to.
can't read that. You didn't get
Oh, my
approval
bad.
from the church.
Well, I'll send some more time.
just,
Just kidding.
just kidding. Go ahead.
Just kidding. So, chapter 10, the heaven of grace, which is forever. The last two sentences. So, again, this is chapter 10, the heaven of grace, which is forever. And I'll post a link down to this book too, so you guys can read it. The last two sentences, basically, Anna's writing about the New Jerusalem where God dwells, and he writes, and I quote, "The people who lived within the heaven of grace have all died. Can one die in heaven? As Suin is saying, the heavenly New Jerusalem has come down to earth now, and our church is heaven at the present. Nevertheless, there will be many people who have died in our church, and there will be many people who will die in our church as well. A place where people do not die is the everlasting kingdom of heaven." Now, skip down to the last couple sentences. This heaven of grace is a place where all die. The 144,000 saints will die and will be transformed, and they must be resurrected in order to enter the eternal heaven. So, I mean, even according to the root of David's own hand, 144,000 actually are going to die. So, where does that leave you? So basically, even if you're the 144,000, you receive this seal, essentially, you're no better off than someone who's just outside of the church, right? Because according to the root of David, the 144,000 are going to perish, right? And also the great multitude, obviously, those are the ones who pass away. So, where is this protection you're relying on? So I mean, if you think about it, the Passover, it doesn't protect you from stubbing your toe, doesn't protect you from getting sick, doesn't protect you from getting car accidents, doesn't protect you from really anything, any way, shape, or form. Never has, because think about, you know, you learn about Josiah, right? And Josiah in chapter, I think it's, what is it, First Kings chapter? Yeah, First Kings chapter 23, something like that. But they read about how Josiah basically restored the Passover, but Josiah died like immediately after. Like if you continue reading the next few verses, he goes against the Pharaoh of Egypt and just straight up gets killed. Right? Like he keeps the Passover, then right after he gets killed. So it's just, if you think critically for a second, how is it this Passover is going to protect you from anything, if Jesus kept it, but he was murdered the next day, right? The apostles kept it, but they were all martyred. Ahnsahnghong even kept it himself and he died. People have kept the Passover in the WMSCOG and they die all the time still, right? And even according to the root of David's hand, like we just read, even if you do keep the Passover and you're the 144,000, you're still just, you're out of luck, right? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So that's actually the study that they caught me with, the seal of God.
Yeah.
That's how I fell into this organization. But I tend to focus on the effect that the teachings have on people. So what's interesting is while I was in the cult, I started reading this book called 48 Laws of Power, which
Okay.
basically go over a lot. They give you like stories, and then they give you examples of how people basically influenced others or used some method of manipulation to get what they wanted from whether their enemy or their ally or whoever, just to benefit themselves, right? And when I was looking at all of the things that they do, how these manipulation methods work, um, it seemed that a lot of the things that was being used by these people who were in power were also being used in the cult. So I was able to like make connections, like, oh, that's happening in my church, and it just kind of made me, start questioning it a little more. But
Yeah.
the effect that this has on people is to not only fear, but the fear of doing very little and having to face a very painful death on the last day, because they teach that the 144,000 are the ones who do the most for the church. So you have to be
Yeah.
the most holy, the most giving, the most sacrificing, basically the one who ruins his life the most for the church. That's the
Yeah.
144,000. So if you're a member, you obviously don't want to die in the last day by an atomic bomb. So you're gonna do everything that is in your power to be one of those 144,000.
Yeah.
So you'll be able to escape that. But if you're part of the great multitude, still being a member, one, you don't really know if you have salvation for sure because you don't know if you have done enough. And the other
Hmm.
is you're gonna die for sure when that atomic bomb lands on you and you're gonna suffer. But you'll be resurrected, so you're fine. That's the common teaching in the WMS when you become a member for a while.
Right.
So that's what that teaching does to people. They teach that because they know that if they get people to believe that, then they are gonna do whatever is in their power to, you know, be part of that 144,000. That's what I
Yeah.
think.
No, you're exactly right. There's a saying that comes to mind. It says, I actually learned this in a sales meeting, but this obviously it's different context. But um, the saying goes like this: the fear of loss is greater than the need for gain. Right. So the fear of losing what you have is a human construct, because you're too afraid to lose what you have in order to gain more. That's why a lot of people don't do stocks. That's why they don't do a bunch of things. They just kind of work, and then just save. They don't really do too much risk, right? Because again, the fear of loss is greater than need for gain. And once you understand that through sales, it opens up obviously a bunch of different things. But in this context, I think that's why they stay in, right? Because they don't know what there is to gain by leaving, right? That's the problem. They don't know what there is to gain by leaving because the fear of loss is so great, is hammered so hard that they can't even fathom that there's a gain for leaving. And touching on the 144,000, it becomes really problematic because through me, through my experience, I had to study the scriptures for myself to really come to the conclusion that the WMSCOG is not the true church established by God. um, when you actually look into what is happening with the 144,000, well, essentially, it is what it is. They're 144,000 Jews. Now, I know the WMSCOG will say, no, it's a spiritual Jew, right? You're a spiritual Jew, right? But you notice in the same passage, if you keep reading, it says there's the spiritual great multitude that comes from all nations, languages, and tongues. So, how do you know who's a spiritual Jew and who's coming from all spiritual nations and languages and tongues? Right? Like it doesn't make any sense. You can't have one's literal, but then this one's metaphorical. It's like, well, it's either literal, all literal, like it's either literal Jews or literal great multitude from all nations and languages, or it's a spiritual Jew or a spiritual multitude, multiple peoples, languages, and tongues. Okay, well then you need to describe how you can distinguish between the two, right? Like not everyone's a spiritual Jew, obviously, because there's only 144,000. Does that mean the rest of the members are spiritually, maybe I'm a spiritual Asian and you're a spiritual, I don't know, Ethiopian, or I mean, how does this work? You know, so
I can already tell what the members would say to each other. I'll probably said something along the lines of, "Oh, only mother knows," or something like that. Which one's which, you know? But
but then
if you go
but
up
then
to
they'd
an Israelite, if you ask him, "Do you know what a spiritual Israelite is?" He's gonna be so confused.
wait, what? Spirit? It's like, and another thing is too is like, why would John make the distinction then? If these Jews can be from any nation, why does he distinguish between the great multitude that's literally from every nation? Why would he have to
Yeah,
say that these are Jews specifically if they're not? Doesn't make any sense. And to your point, like, oh well, mother knows. It's like, okay, well, so what is it then though? Like, is it literal? Is it figurative? Because you can't just pick and choose. I mean, you can, right? But it doesn't mean it's the truth, right? And then I know they're going to say, well, the root of David. Well, okay, but you can't say that and then take 3 chapters out of his book. So that leads us back to square one, right?
yeah.
So essentially, what I think Revelation 7 is saying to those who might still be hanging on to the seal of God thing, what is it talking about? Well, the only verse that specifically says what the seal is, you can actually see the Holy Spirit, right? If you look at basically you look at Ephesians chapter 1 verses 13 to 14, you can see that you receive the Holy Spirit as a seal of redemption, right? And also 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 19 tells us that those who stand firm are sealed with God's inscription. So it's like a twofold thing. You're trusting in God, and you're fleeing from sin, essentially. So you're sealed, you're redeemed, but you're also kept for redemption too. So essentially what Revelation is saying is there's these Jews, these 144,000, they're going to receive the Holy Spirit, become believers of Jesus, right? That's at least through analyzing the actual scriptural text.
Right.
And that those Jews who believe in Jesus receive this seal, which is the Holy Spirit, because when you believe in Jesus, that is what you receive according to the scriptures. And nowhere in the scriptures does it say that this 144,000 specifically will escape death. Yes, in the next chapter it does say that this harm will not come near you, right? Those who have this seal. But at the same time, that doesn't mean they escape death completely, right? That doesn't mean they escape harm, as the scripture suggests, but it never says that they for sure never die. That's just something that they just come up with, right? There are those in the Thessalonians, Paul's epistle to the church in Thessalonica. There's going to be those who are transformed, right? And then 1 Corinthians 15, right? There's going to be those who don't sleep, who will be, the same common principle. But it never mentions that these people are the 144,000, right? So I think there's two different things going on here, and it just takes some analysis to really come to that conclusion. But just for those who might be holding on to the Revelation 7 ordeal, that's a common interpretation, I guess, of what is happening there. So you kind of went into why the WMSCOG relies on fear so much. Did you already mention Andrew from the CIA?
No. Yeah, something I wanted to talk about. I wanted to invite everyone, members or non-members, to check out a few of his videos if you have the time. So Andrew Bustamante is a former CIA agent who goes on different podcasts, and he basically explains that the CIA has a framework to teach their members or the people working for the CIA or the spies how to manipulate others, how to manipulate them so you can get out of them what you want, information or things, or help with a mission or something.
Yeah.
So he puts up forward the acronym RISE, RISE, which basically gives you the four ways in which you can manipulate someone else. So the R would stand for reward, the I would stand for ideology, the C would be coercion, and the E would be ego. And those are broken up in their own categories, but it seems like the one that, well, I realize that the cult uses all of them. They use reward. They promise you heaven that they cannot give you. They use ideology, so they really flip everything that you believe backwards, and give you a very unique way of seeing the world. And they use that to manipulate you and get what they want from you. They use coercion, which is basically threatening someone with a consequence or possible imminent danger if they don't do what you want them to do. And ego, which is basically the idea of you that they make you make of yourself. So, sorry, that's a little confusing, but coercion is basically that fear that they're using on their members. Um, and one example that I really wanted to give, I took it from the Brown book. Let me read a few pages from that if you don't mind.
Yeah, go for it.
Let me look it up real quick. Okay. So this is on the chapter about the Sabbath. If you remember, you obviously have a book. So chapter 23. Actually, it's do not follow those who run out of oil. And I'll read a little bit of it to you so you can see what I mean. I'll start from the top of the page. It reads, they fail to realize their own faults and try to justify their present status of being irregular in their attendance and of taking no pleasure in preaching the gospel. God says, be faithful even to the point of death, and I will give you the crown of life. Those who have run out of oil would even dare to say, as if their words were the very words of God. Quote, you can be saved if you only keep the Sabbath, although you are not fervent in the gospel work. End of quote. Or, quote, you can be saved if you attend the Sabbath worship at least just once, though reluctantly. End of quote. Or, quote, you can be saved if you believe that the Sabbath is right, even though you neither attend worship services nor have enthusiasm for the gospel work. End of quote. Uttering such words, they cause the members to ignore the words of God. What they say is definitely not an instruction from God. They unwittingly utter words that please the devil. If any of the church members listens to them, he or she may mistakenly accept what they say as the truth because they are senior members, and they will end up falling into the mire of death. Yeah. So they basically tell you that if if you are a member who's telling someone that they can be saved, um, even if you're not fervent in the gospel work, or if you're not, if you have irregular attendance, or if you can be saved if you just keep service once, those are words from the devil, and you're gonna fall into the mire of death if you say those things. So you need to be there every Sabbath day, every Sabbath service, not just one, and you can't keep it reluctantly. You have to take fervor in the gospel work. You know what's funny? When I left, the pastor, his name is, well, you never really know the names of the Korean pastors because they change their names when they come to America.
Yeah.
But his given name, or the name he took, was Noah, and he was a pastor here in San Diego. He asked to speak to me when I was leaving so that he could kind of get a sense of why I was leaving, and I gave him the chance, to have a conversation with me because I didn't have to go. But I did, I wanted to hear him out. And one of the things he told me is that just come one service on Saturday, start coming like that, and you'll be fine. And I just remember, don't you know that you're, according to your general pastor, you just spoke words of the devil to me. And if I listen to you, I'm gonna fall into the mire of death. So it's just funny how their own words that they have written down work against them, and how the fear is kind of like sometimes hidden in between the words that they give you. But if you really believe their words, you're gonna be afraid to miss a service every Saturday. So they need to depend on that because that's how they're gonna keep members in. But ultimately, it's a form of manipulating. You can see that clearly.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me like an abusive relationship. For instance, you meet somebody, you fall in love with them, they treat you like royalty, like a rock star. Like you can do no wrong. You are the best thing that's ever happened to them, right? And then so, for the first few dates, you kind of are just like, oh, this person's really into me. This person loves me. This person is just my soulmate, right? And then when you kind of seal the deal and you commit to this person forever, and you consider them also as your prized possession, right? Because that's how they treated you in the beginning, right? But then over time, you see as the relationship gets more serious, uh, things start, and you start getting in the relationship deeper and deeper and deeper, and really just, you're in the thick of this relationship. You end up kind of seeing that it wasn't how it was in the beginning, right? You end up getting beaten or mocked or told that you're not enough or that you're worthless. And that love, that initial love or spark that you had just isn't there anymore, right? The abuser says, you're nothing without them, and if you leave, where else will you go, right? What else is waiting for you? And you keep telling yourself, oh, I hate this relationship, I hate being here, and you want to leave because this person at this point is not what you thought they were. It was not who you fell in love with, right? And you're just depressed, you're hurt, you're broken, you're just aside yourself. But then the abuser tells you, no one will have you, right? If you leave, no one will accept you, if you leave here, like, I'm going to ruin you, basically. But you never leave. Why? Because you still have that glimmer of hope that even though, they might have been doing this to you, they might have been hurting you, they might have been, you know, abusing you, or whatever the case is, that glimmer of hope that, well, maybe that person that I fell in love with is still in there, right? It's just something happened. Maybe I did something, right? So you kind of start thinking you're the part of the problem, right? And but you believe too that the lies that this abusive relationship, this partner, is telling about you, right? You're worthless. You're nothing. You don't deserve anything. Everything bad you deserve. And you keep going back into the relationship because, number one, you believe the lies, but you also are constantly seeking after that love and adoration that that person had in the beginning, right? Because you believe that somehow, some way, you can achieve that again, right? That utopia of what you had in the beginning, because that's what made you fall in love, and you thought that that was real, right? And so you constantly are thinking about that. But in this case, no matter how terrible the abuser is, you never end up leaving because of that little bit of hope, and you actually start believing what this abuser is telling you about yourself, even though it's not true, it's lies. Um, but in reality, if you're looking outside in to this relationship, it's a lot easier to point out and say, "Oh, of course this person's abusing you. Of course you're what they're not what they're saying is true." But being in that relationship, you're under a whole nother spell, if you will, right? And you don't realize that actually the abuser, the only power that this abuser has is the power they have over you. If you don't give them any power, they cease to be anything, right? And when you first meet in the relationship, the abuser seems like they're high in authority, right? Like they're strong, they're important, they're special. But in reality, the only thing that's making them strong, important, or special is you in this situation, in this relationship. But if you take that away, the abuser ceases to be anything, right? And that's the abuser's worst fear, is the abuse victim to realize that. So that's why they dangle that little bit of hope, that little bit of maybe one day they're like lovey-dovey, but then the rest of the day, for a month or something, they're just terrible to you. But they kind of give you that little release, right? Like that push, 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 release, push, 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 release, right? And so I guess you, as the viewer, if you are in the WMSCOG, if you saw somebody in this kind of relationship, would you tell them to leave this relationship? Would you tell them, the abused party, that they should leave this relationship and move on because there's better things, there's more fish in the sea? Would you say, hey, you need to run for your life, this person is going to destroy you, right? Then why don't you live up to your own standards? Why are you still in, right? Like, I mean, obviously I don't have to explain the parallels, right? Because if you're in, you know what I'm talking about. I don't have to explain what I'm talking about. So if you would tell this abuse victim that, hey, no, this person's evil, this person does not love you, they're lying to you, and you would be that person, why can't you say that to yourself, right? How do you know you're different than this victim? How are you in a different situation? How is yours better or different? It's the same exact situation. And I know because my sister was in a very abusive relationship, and I know exactly what she went through because she told me, right? And it seems very similar to what we experience as a WSCOG member. So I would say, if you're a viewer watching and you're in the WSCOG, why don't you take your own advice? Um, you know, and that leads me to my next segue here. Next question is mother's love. Right? I feel like this is a fitting place to talk about this. Mother's love to you, did it ever seem actually unconditional? Why or why not?
For money. Uh, but yeah, definitely not at all. They have a sermon that I remember really well. It's called "God is a Surveillance Camera," and they in this sermon they basically explained that there was a certain brother doing something that was like wrong or sinful, and the other one was
Yeah.
like judging him because don't you know that God is, he tells him, don't you know that God is a surveillance camera, and he's aware of everything you do, and he basically, they're teaching the members that God can see everything they do and they're judged for everything,
Yeah.
and we're labeled as so wicked and so far from God. So it's just funny. It's funny that they say mother has any kind of love for their members. I think they depict her this way because, well, they we know that the Bible, the God of the Bible, is an actual loving, merciful God. So, and people, this is like a common knowledge. So if you're studying the Bible, you want to relate your idol or your God of your form of worship. You want to make it as close as you can to the actual God of the Bible, but it's nothing like that. Also, I think the church alienates you so much from your family and friends that you really have nothing outside, like I've said before. So you think to yourself, well, at least mother loves me no matter what I do, or at least the brothers love me, you know, even though everybody outside hates me because of how I've become so like a robot, so indoctrinated. You're not really yourself. So they don't really hate you. Like they just hate the person who you've become inside of the school. So because they can see that it's all fake, it's all fabricated. But you can have comfort as a member that, well, at least this Asian 80-year-old woman loves me. But in reality, she doesn't even know you exist. So there's really nothing loving about her. Um, yeah,
Yeah, that was
that's
something
my
I
opinion.
struggled. That was something I struggled with personally in being in the church. It's because mother says if you don't smile enough, right, you're gonna go to hell. You don't preach enough, you're gonna go to hell, right? You don't prepare enough, you're gonna go to hell. Like all these things. I mean, they change the meaning of words, right? Like unconditional to them is extremely conditional. Love to them is like you think like loving your spouse is like taking them out to dinner, serving them, doing the dishes, or you know letting them go on a like spa day or something, or going and making your mom a meal, right? That's not love, right? Going and doing helping your dad with the yard work even though you don't have to, you're old and moved up, like that's not love. Love is bringing people into the church, right? Because that's true love, right? So they changed the meaning of words, right? So even though like if you hear any of mother's sermons or general pastor sermons, the love of God that they are referencing is the most conditional love you will ever experience in your entire life. Like your mom, your physical mom, for your physical parents, yeah, they might want you to do something, right? But they're never going to kill you because you don't do it, right? Like and that's something that I had to come to the realization because I was like, in my mind, I'm like, God is a psychopath, right? What kind of a parent is like, hey, if you don't do this, hey, if you don't smile enough, hey, if you don't tell people how cool I am, it's just that's not unconditional. Like the word unconditional means without conditions, but yet they say, oh, mother's love is unconditional. But by the way, you have this, you know, myriad of lists of numerical things you have to do in order to achieve this quote unquote unconditional love. And it's like, but that's not unconditional though. Like let's go back to what unconditional means. Without condition, which leads me into my next question. All right, slander, right? Another one that they love to change the definition of. So slander means a false statement that hurts the character of an organization, right? The key word here is false, right? Not experience, not factual, false, right? So me and Ricardo are giving our experiences. We're talking about doctrine. We're talking about these things. These are our opinions, right? It's still not slander just because some of the things we talk about might not reflect good on the WMSCOG. And don't get me wrong, there are some great things, right? And I know I might get a lot of flack from this from the ex-member community, but I'm a big believer in not throwing out, the baby with the bathwater, right? Like we learned how to be, God-fearing, right? We learned how to read the scriptures. I mean, granted, it was the wrong way, right? But we learned how to read the scriptures pretty well. We learned how to be good people. We did community. So I think it's good to, try as hard as we can to take the good with the bad, right? Of course, the bad far exceeds the good. I get that. But I think that ultimately is another way of not falling into the stereotype, right? Because the stereotype is ex-members are just evil Satan worshipers who just see negative all the time. No, I don't see negative all the time. I had a lot of great memories with people in that church. I did. I'm not going to lie. If I said, oh, it was all negative, I'm a liar for sure. Um, Granted, was the underlying context of that true? I wouldn't say so, but I can admit that there was a lot of good times. I have a lot of great memories with people inside that place. I remember doing a lot of things that I was proud of in that place. And so I personally take that with me. So I'm not going to say it's all bad, right? Because in every situation, regardless of cult or not, there's going to be good and bad, right? With everything. So this is not slander what we're doing now, because I'm giving, you know, I'm just being real, right? I'm just being real with people. Um, but yeah, they changed the meaning of slander. So what we're doing is not slander. It's based off our opinions, it's based off of our recollections, and it's based off scripture. There's nothing wrong or slanderous about it. Um, so that's kind of my tangent there. Uh, how did you view slanderers when you were in the WMSCOG?
Well, I think you did a good job at explaining that very well. Um, when they told me about slander, it was kind of like almost the first night I was there, I believe, if not one of the first few. Um, but it's because it's funny that they kind of do what the news does. You know, if you watch the news, whoever's their political enemy, or whoever's running against them, they'll like discredit them before you can even hear them out. And they'll make something up. They'll find something to label you some way, so that way people will never listen to what you have to say. And this is kind of like what the WMSCOG does uh, to its members. They go, well, anyone who doesn't keep Saturday, who goes to any church that keeps worship Sunday, they definitely don't have the truth. They're following Satan, so definitely, they're worshiping the sun god. So definitely don't believe anything they have to say. But little do you know that those are the people actually following the truth. So the truth is, just like the Wimscott said, that Satan uses tools to drive people away from God. I do believe that. That is true. But in this case, I believe it was Satan using this organization, the WMSCOG, to drive people who were legitimately and honestly and sincerely looking for God. They use it. He uses this organization to drive them away from God into a false gospel and a false doctrine. So
Yeah,
once you come out, you see, and once you become familiar with how people manipulate each other, you see that this was nothing but a tactic used against you, and you fell for it, just like all the
yeah.
others.
And I hate to say it, but we're most likely not the last ones, unfortunately. Hopefully one day we can
Yeah.
say, whoever comes out last, hopefully we can say like it's done. But you know, one time I remember I was probably a few months in the truth, quote unquote. I remember I came across the examining site, but obviously I had no idea about anything at that point. I was 19, so they don't teach you about cults or cult tactics or proof texting church or anything like that. So I'm a 19-year-old kid. I was raised LDS, so I didn't really know much about the Bible or how to really read it or anything like that. So I just took everything hook, line, and sinker. And I remember coming across the examining site where I think it was like one of the only articles on there at the time, if I remember, because it was a very brand new thing. Because back in 2014, 2015, when me and my wife came in to the church, there was really nothing out there on this organization. I think that was the examining site in its infancy. But anyway, so I came across that book, right? The one we actually just read from, the problem. I don't remember the title. It's so long I can't remember it all the time. But it's basically the New Jerusalem and the problem with the women's veil, or something like that, right? That book basically Ahnsahnghong wrote to debunk God the Mother, right? And I remember that perplexed me because I just believed in God the Mother. I was like, hey, why is Father basically debunking Mother? That doesn't make any sense to me. I didn't read the whole book. I just read snippets of what was shown. I have read the whole book, and I recommend anyone. I'll leave the link in the description. Read through the whole thing. It's actually pretty wild. Um, but I just read snippets of it. I didn't read the whole thing because, again, I was taught from an early point on, like, there's slander, right? There's people online that are trying to kill God, and they're like the Pharisees and Sadducees, just like 2,000 years ago, like all these things. So I was well aware of that too. So I just read snippets of it. I didn't read the full article that was on there. I remember bringing it up to my overseer, and he was like, he told me this analogy, and the analogy kind of goes like this. And let me know if this is familiar with what they taught you in San Diego, because Utah originally was actually a part of San Diego, so it might be similar. But essentially, they would say, imagine there's a father who had a treasure hidden for his kids, and then one night, two burglars, or burglars, I mean, it's not number specific, but imagine burglars broke into the house, and they said, hey, we heard there's a treasure. Where is this treasure? We want to take it. And the father says, no, there's no treasure here, right? To protect his children. And so the burglars like beat him up and then leave him, right? Because they couldn't find the treasure. They searched the house, they couldn't find the treasure. And the kids come out and they're like, hey, you told us that there was a treasure. So is there not a treasure? And he's like, no, there was a treasure. I just did it to protect you. Right. And then shows them the real treasure, right? It shows them the treasure, and everything's fine and dandy. So they use this analogy to basically paint, you the whole debacle with Suin basically stealing father's notes and then proclaiming herself as the bride, and him writing the book was essentially him saying there is no treasure, right? But after the issue subsided and the burglars receded from the house, all of a sudden, boom, here's God the Mother, here's the real treasure, right? Here's the treasure of treasures, is what kind of like the concept of this. Did you ever hear about that countermeasure?
No, I didn't hear that specific countermeasure, just because I think I never had that actual question, but
Oh,
it's actually hilarious. It's hilarious how they just make up any story, any analogy. That analogy is not even in the Bible. So where did it come from? It's
yeah, no
there's no
scripture was
basis
shown.
for it. Yeah,
Just
that's the
pure
thing.
analogy.
You're asking supposed Christians about their beliefs in the Bible, and they're giving you a bedtime story instead of going to scripture. Like, it doesn't make any sense. Plus, think about it logically. A spoken statement doesn't carry the same value as a written statement. Okay? So let's use that analogy. Let's say that him saying there's no treasure is him writing the actual book. And then him telling his children that there is a treasure is just telling them out loud. But that's conflicting. It doesn't carry the same weight. If in fact there was a treasure, why didn't he write an actual book testifying about the existence of the female image of God to his followers, just like he did, arguing against that idea? You know what I mean? And another thing I wanted to say is the verses. Like, once you read what he wrote against God the Mother, the verses that he uses to refute the existence of a female image of God are the exact same verses that the WMSCOG uses to say that there is a female image of God. So he
Not
literally puts
only
a verse and says, "This is the bride," but then the WMSCOG goes and this is mother.
not
Or he
only
says this is the
that,
church,
but
and then yeah,
Suin uses the same verses that he's arguing against that the WMSCOG use. So I'll take it a step further. Suin is using the same verses the WMSCOG are using currently,
that's crazy.
right? So it's not even just Ahnsahnghong versus the WMSCOG. It's like Ahnsahnghong is literally refuting the WMSCOG through Suin because she taught it first.
Yeah, no
But
wonder they don't want you to read that.
Yeah.
Well, he's the root of David, right?
Yeah. Well, apparently 3 of the chapters are not important in the Green Book. So, I mean, we'll just move on from that. That's a whole
Yeah,
nother.
Kim Ju Cho has to monitor whether the second coming Christ did his job correctly or not.
Yeah. His tears are on the page and he wrote in blood, just not those 3 chapters, just so everyone's aware.
Funny.
Here's the issue I have with the analogy, right? So they allege, like kind of what you were saying, the alleged treasure is these notes that were supposedly taken, right? What I find is very interesting is, for instance, when Ahnsahnghong was baptized, and there was really no record available to see when he was baptized. I think around the time when the SDA produced that baptism record, all of a sudden there was a Bible that confirmed, 19, I was baptized in 1948, right? And we can talk about that in a minute. But the point being, for this argument, is there was something produced that showed, hey, no, he was baptized in 1948. There was a written statement, right? Um, but I find it ironic how the stuff that they use to prove mother today, right? It's like, where are those notes? Where is this treasure that you're referring to? I have yet to see this treasure that was supposedly stolen. Like, did he not write any more about it? Because think about it, the stuff they show, like, is 1955, right? The unsealing of Seven Thunders, right? That was well before the Suin debacle situation. So you can't say that that's the treasure because he wrote that in 1955. And again, I have an article about that where it's actually a genderless child. It's not a she, it's not a he, it's a genderless child that's being revealed in that preface. But even still, it's like that's still 1955. Well, then they might say, oh, well, there's the wedding photo. Okay, well, that was taken after, right? After so that proves mother somehow. Um, or there's the I follow mother sermon, which is taken out of context. They only show you the last 4 sentences, but obviously it's a whole sermon, right? And he's basically talking about the new covenant, the way of heaven, that is our mother, right? The new covenant. He's talking about the covenant alone. He's not talking about a female deity, but anyway, that's another story for another time. But anyway, my whole premise is, where are these alleged notes that were stolen, right? Why is there no reference to these notes in Ahnsahnghong's writing? And why did he not even mention the fact that these notes were stolen in the book? Right? There's so many things we have to establish first before we take that at face value. Like, where are these treasures, right? If it's a treasure, I mean, and it's something that you can reproduce, which is notes, why would he not write it again? Right? What would stop him from writing it again and giving it to his children, right? I have never seen or heard these notes actually being able to, that were written from father to reveal this mother. No written statement whatsoever about mother, about Zhang Yilzha, about anything, right? So I would ask, where can we see these notes? Because that would put an end to the argument. That would put an end to the debate. Like, hey, these are handwritten notes, verified handwritten notes from Ahnsahnghong himself, proclaiming that she is God the Mother, right? Like, that's not something so outlandish to ask, you know. Um, and to the point of, if we talk about the baptism record, he wrote in a book, I was baptized in 1948, right? No signature, just that, right? So it's like, Ricardo, imagine you're a billionaire, right? And you pass away, and I'm your friend, right? Because we're friends. And then I go up to the judge because your estate's being held by the state, right? Let's say you don't have any heirs, and I go to the judge and I say, hey, Ricardo said I could have all of his stuff, and the judge is like, well, what proof do you have? And I pull out a notebook and say, Ricardo said to me, Adam, that I get all of his stuff. What more proof do you need? Right? No written signature,
Wow.
no written statement, no nothing. Do you think the judge would be like, whoa, snap. Okay, well, here it is. What's the account number we should transfer your $1 billion to? Like, no one in their right mind would be like, no, that doesn't make any sense. Right? Imagine, or like, let's say I have a photo, right? Like, I'll take a screenshot of this, right? And then let's say same situation, I take the screenshot of our Zoom or our StreamYard call that we have, and I'm like, see, I took a photo with him. What more proof do you need? Give me the money. Give me the treasure. Like, it doesn't work in the real world. It doesn't work. And so I think if those notes do indeed exist, where are they? Why were they not reproduced? Why do they not even attempt to recover these notes? Because obviously they're important, right? And I think it's funny too, like if you think about it from the Seventh-day Adventist perspective, this whole baptism debacle. Imagine you walk into the SDA church, and you're like, hey, I just need this guy's baptism record. They give you the baptism record because they have nothing to hide, right? It's like, yeah, here you go, and they take it and leave. That is the extent the SDA knows probably of this whole debacle, right? They just imagine some people coming in, getting a baptism record, and walking out. That is the only thing that they know. But they don't know the can of worms that is being opened because of that record. But it's just like, imagine, like, okay, the SDA church does not think Ahnsahnghong is God, has no real bearing on whether he is God or not. It doesn't matter to them. His baptism date surely does not mean anything to them. They don't believe he's the root of David. They don't know about him at all, except that he was just baptized, right? So it's just what reason would they have to falsify this record? Like what possible gain do they have from falsifying this record? Like it just they have no bearing on the WMSCOG.
Yeah, yeah, but the WMSCOG has a lot of reasons to do it. Money.
For sure. I guess from the Seventh Day Adventist perspective, they're just like, yeah, here's a baptism record, and that's the last they heard of it, right? And
Yeah,
then
they
all of a
don't.
sudden, they don't know, they don't care, right? Like, why would they
Yeah,
forge something they have no, like, they do not care if Ahnsahnghong is God or not. They have no clue. They do not care. I guarantee you. Go ask a Seventh Day Adventist church. Call the Seventh Day Adventist church in Korea and be like, "Hey, do you believe Ahnsahnghong is God of the root of David, and that he needed to be baptized in 1948?" They'll be like, "What are you talking about? I have no idea what that even is." So there's
what
no reason
sucks
for them to do that.
what sucks is that the members don't really ask those kind of important questions that they should ask. Like I didn't even whenever I would ask something like that, and they would give me a vague answer, like you just kind of give the example of, I would just, like all the other members, I would just be like, oh, okay, that makes sense, and then just
Right.
go on my way, which is sad. Now I like my actual faith that I have in Jesus. It's strong because I can. There's a lot of proof to it. There's a lot you can put it to the test over and over and over again. It's gonna stand, but you can't do that
Yeah.
with the beliefs of this organization, unfortunately, or
Well,
fortunately. Yeah.
and the Bible says, like we should put things to the test, right? The more you research Jesus, the more you come to the conclusion he is who he is. Then why is it not the same for Ahnsahnghong? Why is it not the same for Zangilja? Right? Like, why is it not the same? I mean, the answer is pretty clear. Obviously, it's a rhetorical question. But anyway, moving on, because we still have a few more things to get into. Um, so obviously, we're not allowed to rely on ourselves in WMSCOG, right? Um, I mean, we kind of already covered that a little bit. So my next question would be, why do they say then it's according to your faith in difficult situations? Because obviously in that church you don't do anything without getting approval, right? If you don't, like, you everything is planned out. Your preaching location, your preaching time, your meal time, your everything is planned out, and you have to abide by this, timeline, this plan. Everything is planned out, everything is approved, and it's a whole process, right? So then why in times of crisis, for lack of a better word, in difficult situations, why do you think they say, "Oh, it's according to your faith"? Then,
Well, I think it's because they just don't want to be held accountable for anything that they make their members do. Um, it's funny that they say this when, like you said, in the most like delicate situations. But you already know what that means. They're basically saying, well, you know what you have to do. You know what our beliefs are. You know that if you're not here every Sabbath, even though a parent of you is in the hospital, um, when they say according to your faith, that means, well, according to what we believe here in the cult, we believe that you should stay here on Saturday keeping service and not go see your sick parent at the hospital. So, that's just one example that I could give you on this. one of my experiences in the cult. But they're basically saying, well, I don't want to give you the answer that the cult would actually give you because it sounds too bad. So let me just say this according to your faith, so that way I don't have to like answer, like give you the actual answer that the cult should give you if you know if they're sticking to their doctrine. That's what I think.
Yeah. Yeah, and some of the things that come up too is like, when they get in a hard spot where they're like, oh, well, it's not really things that are written, because what you're kind of saying is main things that are written, what they think is clearly written, right? Sometimes what they'll do is they'll have something where it's like, it leads you to a mental dead end, right? Where you need guidance, right? For instance, like if you get a Christmas present, what do you do with it, right? And they'll be like, "Oh, it's according to your faith, like you keep it, or you can give it to the church, or it's according to your faith." So that, but then they also say like, "Well, if you follow pagan customs or something, or they have all these great details of all these other things, right, to the very T." But then when it comes into like reality, where you're like, "Okay, if this happened to me, what do I do?" Oh, it's according to your faith.
Yeah, when you have
It's
to
like,
actually apply it in your life.
and you're lost because you're like, "But I was taught that I can't." Right? I'm not enough. I need the church to guide me. I need mother to guide me. You can't just, it's like you say, do you follow mother? Do you really follow mother though? Right? Do you really follow God? But then when you're like, okay, well, what would mother do in this situation? Oh, brother, it's according to your faith. Oh, it's
Oh
according to your
man.
faith. It's like, but you just told me like I don't have faith. Like if I don't go to Sabbath, I don't have faith, right? So obviously I need to do that, right? That is the correct way. But then when it comes to this situation, you're just saying, shoot from the hip and hope everything works out. Like that doesn't seem logical. That's not following the pattern here. Um, yeah, which leads me to my next point. Actually, have you ever heard the phrase in the church? Like, I mean, obviously it's in the Bible, but don't go beyond what's written. Right? What does that mean?
I did hear it, but I'm not sure how they would apply it to their own doctrine. I would assume it's something like them claiming that they only follow scripture, which is laughable, if you know your Bible. But
Yeah.
yeah, I'm not sure how in what specific format this was used against you in particular, or how you experience that.
I wouldn't say it was used against me. I would say it was used to um, basically keep people in line, right? Because if you're how I understood it was like if you're looking into a prophecy too far, right? Like you're trying to find extra fulfillments of a said verse that the church didn't already ordain was a fulfillment of that verse, right? That's kind of the context I heard was, oh, the prophecy says this, but you're saying this. And it's just don't go beyond what is written. Just read what's there, understand what the church is telling you it says, and what the actual fulfillment is. But essentially, what they're doing is they're saying, don't go beyond what the church tells you it is, right? That's the context
Mm,
they're trying to get to. But they use it as, don't go beyond what is written in the Bible. But what's really happening is they're saying, don't go beyond what we tell you the Bible says, right? Because some people will say, like if you're understanding a prophecy wrong, or you're leaning too much into a prophecy that's not approved by the head office, that's what they would say is, don't go beyond what is written, right? Meaning don't go beyond what the church told you it says. And I find it ironic because every prophecy that the WMSCOG teaches relies on going above and beyond, you know, uh, what is written. For instance, like King David, prime example, this 37-year, he must fulfill this prophecy. Where does it say that? It doesn't say anywhere.
yeah.
In fact, it says Jesus reigns forever spiritually, right? And then they'll say, well, he has to be, he has to preach for 3 years and then 37 years. Like, where does it say that? Right? You're saying this physical throne is a fulfillment of his physical life, and that, of course, Jesus reigns forever and ever. I was like, but you're not saying that though. You're saying he only reigned for 3 years. So you're mixing so many, like you're going above what is written. Same thing with Tuesday and Sabbath day evening worship, right? That's not biblical. I've actually heard from my missionary overseer that is indeed not in the Bible, but because mother is a lawgiver, she can do whatever she wants, right? But again, my whole point is everything that they teach relies on going above what is written. If you take your sermon books out and you just dump out the verses and you try to put them back together, you will never come to the same conclusions unless you have the transitions, the analogies, I know the verse actually says this, but it actually means this. That is literally the definition of going beyond what is written.
Yeah.
And you can imply whatever you want. I could say, and they're like, well, it's just, it's implying this, right? It's implying third day. It's implying Saturday. It's implying the 37 years. It's implying fig tree, all these things. But implications without evidence are just implications, right? Like it doesn't change reality. Like I could imply doing the will of God is giving me $1,000, right? And I would have just as much proof as the WMSCOG says that Jesus needs to preach 37 years, which is nothing, right? Even King David's actual throne was split up in 7 years and 6 months in 33 years, right? So it has no basis in Scripture. So I mean, and I could say that doing God's will is me basically charging people $1,000 and you'll have heaven, right? And probably cheaper than what the WMSCOG charges, right? Of course, absolutely. There's no I'm not trying to promote. I'm obviously using fallacy to argue against fallacy, but my point is we both have just as much proof for our prophecies in this situation, which is absolutely zero. Which another thing that kind of leads me into this is the WMSCOG says that prophecies are fulfilled once, twice, 3, 50 times, right? Depending on the situation and what we need. That's what they're really saying. Have you heard that?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah, I've heard that. But it's funny. So a prophecy is fulfilled multiple times. So the first time it was fulfilled, was it really fulfilled? Do you know what fulfilled means? Like the actual definition of the word? And another thing is, like you say, if they tell you don't go beyond what is written, so to me that sounds like, yeah, we're gonna tell you the Bible says this, but don't check it. Don't try to see how this relates to the actual real life and the real world. Just believe us. To me, that's what it sounds like. Sounds like, just if you just accept this at face value and just believe what it says, and you have true faith. But if you go and check it, then that's not true. That's not true faith, right? You're going beyond what the Bible says. But like, there's no real connection to what they're saying, to what they're teaching you. They're just throwing words at you from the Bible, but they don't really want you to actually look into those things. And like you said,
yeah,
the prophecy of King David is just laughable. All these prophecies and the sermons that they have, you can tell just by, like, if you're on the outside, if you're not indoctrinated and you look at this book, like the transitions that it has, like they'll throw you a little tiny verse and there'll be like 2 paragraphs of like how you're supposed to explain the verse, what you're supposed to add into it. Maybe they'll throw an analogy in there, and then you do another little section of another verse in another book, and it's just, you're really putting up like creating your own puzzle out of the Bible
yeah,
to justify your beliefs, you know?
yeah. Partial fulfillment is the phrase that they use, but that's an oxymoron. Fulfillment means it's fulfilled, fully.
Yeah,
This thing has
yeah.
been fully filled. Like it's you can't have a you can't hand me a half glass of water, and I know they use this analogy, but say it's full of water, right? It's like no, it's half
So
full of water, so it's not
so
full.
why?
It's not.
Yeah, exactly. Why did Jesus come? To abolish the law, or or why?
To
Wasn't it to
fulfill.
fulfill it? Did he come and actually did what he was supposed to do,
Apparently
or did
not.
he not? See, that's
Apparently
what I
not.
mean. If you want
Right?
to follow the
Jesus.
WMSCOG, you have to be convinced of that.
Yeah, you have to basically say Jesus failed, because
Yeah.
otherwise, why does he have to come back a second time? If he was successful, then there is no need for him to come back a second time. See how that becomes problematic when you read the scriptures? It means Jesus failed. What do we call Christs that fail? Right? And let me just say, like, obviously the church doesn't teach that it's fulfilled 50 times. I know I might get in trouble for saying that. That's just a joke. But so just be clear. I know how kind of
Yeah.
contentious this might be, but
But
you
a
know,
lot of the times, like things that I saw were like, oh, this disaster is gonna happen, right? Like the end of the world, or like, a lot of the members, when you hear their testimonies, um, even actually I myself heard this, when I went and I asked about, like the prophecies of the end of the world and like all the fulfillments and stuff, and I would go up to a member and I'll be like, hey, I heard that this was gonna happen, like the end was gonna come at a certain time, and then why didn't it happen? Like was the prophecy inaccurate, or what happened? And a lot of the times they would say, oh, like mother's just being merciful on us, and waiting for us to change, so that's why the world hasn't ended. It was supposed to end, but since we're so slow at changing, and we're like still so wicked, and we are doing so little for the gospel, we haven't found the children of God, so that's why the prophecy wasn't fulfilled. Which is like, well, aren't biblical prophecies in the Bible supposed to be fulfilled? Isn't like what we use to make sure that the Bible is actually true? So
yeah,
it's
isn't that
just
the whole point
what
of
makes
why
it
you
true at this point.
believed? Yeah, like isn't that the
Mhm.
whole point of why you believe? Because all the Bible prophecies were fulfilled? Like if there's like 5 or 6 failed prophecies, then it means the whole Bible is wrong. It means the whole Bible does not need to be considered an authority. And so it's like you're using the Bible as an authority, but yet you're also finding fallacies within the scriptures to prove why you are having fallacies within your organization. But you can't say that the Bible, which would be flawed at this point, because you have to find flaws in it for you to be able to keep up your image of, oh, see, we're actually following the Bible still because the Bible fails a couple of times. It's like if the Bible fails a couple of times, what makes you think you're going to be saved? What makes you think you're going to go to heaven? How do you even know it exists? How do you even know Jesus exists? How do you even know he's the way, the truth, and the life then? If the Bible fails over and over again, which is to justify why you fail over and over again. The logic just, the math ain't mathin', right? Okay, so moving on a little bit, we still have a bit more to get into. So one thing that I want to mention, if you read the Green Book about Jesus, it's chapter 11, page 74. Basically, Ahnsahnghong teaches that Isaiah 66, verses 15 to 16, about God coming as the judge with fire. In that chapter, he refers to this being the last day. Um, no, sorry. This one he refers to, he's to pronounce judgment in false churches, right? So he comes in the flesh. So in this chapter, Green Book chapter 11, Ahnsahnghong says that this coming with fire is a metaphorical fire where he comes in the flesh to judge churches and to basically judge people, like spiritually speaking, not really. And then in chapter 15, the Son of Man will come on a cloud, page 109, Ahnsahnghong says that those same verses, Isaiah 66 and 15 to 16, so the same verses, is about Jesus coming with fire to destroy the world, which everyone, that no one will see. So, first issue is it contradicts completely, right? One verse can't mean multiple things. It can't, because that's just not how reality works. Isaiah 66, verses 15 to 16, it's either God's coming as judge to destroy the world with fire, or he's coming in the flesh to do like a metaphorical judgment among false churches. How can it be both? Because he's using the same timeline, right? In the last days, right? Because Isaiah 66, they teach is like the last day, right? Like God's going to come as a judge. It's like, okay, but if that's the case, then it can't be both, right? It just doesn't make any sense. Then, like, and how do you distinguish between the realities then, right? Like, if one verse can mean multiple realities, how do you not get your realities mixed up? Like, how do we know in this case, because the Holy Spirit is also used as fire, right? The fire of the Holy Spirit. How do we know Jesus isn't coming and just bringing the Holy Spirit? Right? That could be reality, right? So that's where it gets dicey, because as soon as you start just creating all these different you start creating all these different realities, becomes extremely problematic, and they contradict each other. It can't it can't work, right? Like, how do we know which reality is which then? And then they might say, oh, that's why we need the root of David. I would believe that had you not removed 3 chapters from this very book that we are talking about. So it's like, either way, I don't see how there's a rectifying answer, because you can't just go back to the root of David, root of David, root of David, but then be like, oh, except those 3 chapters, he was wrong on those. Except don't read these books, he was wrong on those. But the ones that we have approved for you to read, that's where the good stuff is. It's like, I don't think Jesus works that way. I don't think that's not how reality works. But anyway, do you have any thoughts on that before we move on?
Sounds like they have to monitor what the root of David actually said. And I don't know if you
Uh,
want to talk about the root of David a little later.
yeah,
Um,
we'll probably talk about it a little bit later, maybe in part 2. If you want to do a part 2, maybe we'll come back and dissect some of that.
Because I was so convinced of that, and it's funny how, man, like root of David is in chapter 5, right, of
Yeah,
Revelation. Just read chapter 6, guys. Like if you're a member and you're having doubts about the root of David, read chapter 6, and like you'll be able to
and
see what the
7,
scroll actually is. Yeah, like
put them all
all this
together.
is happening. All this is happening in the kingdom of heaven. It's a vision that Apostle John was having, and like it's really not what these people are telling you that it is. Like if you just read chapter 6 and like Adam says chapter 7, like you'll just be able to see like whenever the scroll is actually opened and unsealed in heaven by Jesus, and as each seal is being removed, as judgment is coming unto the world as a result of the removing of the seal. So this has nothing to do with the actual scripture that we just really fell for a
Yeah,
really blatant lie.
yeah. If you read Revelation chapter 5, clearly, I mean, you see the scene is in heaven, right? You have angels there. You have the 4 living creatures. You have the 24 elders. You have the throne of God. You have the altar with souls. You have all these things taking place in Revelation 5 and 6. Like, it's clearly a heavenly scene. It's not. Jesus never leaves the throne, right? The Lamb never leaves the throne. He doesn't come to earth. There's nothing that even remotely hints at that. Not only that, but if this seal scroll, right? Because they've emphasized so much on the sealed scroll. Well, if you read Revelation chapter 9, there's a scroll that John eats. Or sorry, Revelation chapter 10, there's a scroll that John eats, and it is sweet but then turns sour, right? So they say this scroll in Revelation 5 is surely the Bible, but it's like, okay, well, the scroll can clearly mean something else, because Revelation 10, John eats it, right? So he's obviously not shoving the Bible down his throat, is he? So it's like, you have to prove that this scroll, number one, is the Bible, and you have to prove, number one, that it was sealed, that it was
Yeah.
specifically sealed, that the Bible would be sealed, which they don't, right? They show Isaiah 29, but they take that out of context, and I go through that in my videos. So if you're interested, check those out. But by the
And I wouldn't,
time,
sorry,
no, go ahead.
I wouldn't be surprised if the majority of the members, Adam, haven't even read past that little beginning of chapter 5 of Revelation. And I wouldn't be
I think
surprised if
so.
they've never read chapter 6 at all. Like they haven't even started reading that. I wouldn't be surprised. That's why they believe it.
Yeah, and I think that comes with the root of David, right? You're not allowed to read only what the root of David has taught and what the root of David has revealed. It's kind of hard to read and understand what the root of David taught when it's hidden and taken out, isn't it? Right? How am
Yeah.
I supposed to take that? How am I supposed to take that seriously if I have no access to his books? I can't read them for myself. The ones that I do have been changed, edited, um, whole chapters removed, whole paragraphs removed from other chapters. Like, explain to me how I'm supposed to believe that I can only read what the root of David has approved. And then they'll say something like, well, mother, right? He left everything to mother. But it's like, in the case of a will, you need some written statement, right? If you're just going to vote, or if you're just going to put all your eggs in the, oh, well, he took a photo with her basket, there's plenty of photos of people with Ahnsahnghong. It doesn't mean they're all mother. It doesn't mean they're all authority figures in the church, does it? So your whole argument is, oh, well, he revealed mother. How? Oh, watch the reenactment video, right? Where he goes to China and stuff. It's like, That's not how evidence works, right? You can't just reenact something and say, yeah, look, it happened. See, it's a reenactment. No, there has to be, the reason the reenactments exist is because there's actual facts to back it up. A reenactment simply just puts the facts into a perspective where you can easily understand it, right? A reenactment itself is not evidence that an event took place, right?
Yeah,
Otherwise, I could reenact a murder in a crime scene, doesn't mean someone got murdered, right? Like it doesn't make any
yeah,
sense. The logic just, it does not follow. So you have to produce a written statement showing, no, look, father left everything to mother, right? Here it is, boom. And then the case is closed. Like, what can we say? But it doesn't exist, right? There's a fuzzy photo and a reenactment video, and that's basically all you get. And then little snippets of sermons taken out of context where if you just read that one sentence, yeah, you could come to that conclusion, right? But why don't they show the full thing if that is indeed the conclusion you're supposed to come to? Why can't you see the whole sermon? Why can't you see the whole chapter, the whole book, right? Like it just they take this one, like, yeah, if you just take the word mother, yeah, it means mother, right? But also if you read in the book of Matthew, when Jesus is coming and talking about he's talking to his disciples and someone comes and says, oh, your mother and your brothers are trying to see you, right? And he's like, who are my mother and my brothers? Those who do the will of God are my mother, brothers, sisters, and they're my mother, right? So mother can also mean children of God. So I have yet to find a verse that a mother references a female deity. So anyway, moving on. When you went on vacation in the WMSCOG, did you ever feel like it was an actual vacation?
sorry, I just want to touch up a little bit on what you were just talking
Oh,
about.
go ahead. Go ahead.
um it's like it's like saying that the reason why we know that Jesus was crucified is because they made the movie The Passion of Christ,
Exactly.
and not because of we have the scriptures. There has to be a written statement, a written testimony, just like the Gospels. The reason why we can have faith today is because we have the written Gospels of people who walked with Jesus or were in the presence of someone who walked with Jesus and saw everything he did. So it's just like if you could really do your due diligence in the church, it's you wouldn't be there a very long time. But unfortunately, you're not able to test these things out because they just
No.
attack you with accusations.
Yeah,
But
there's so much
can you repeat?
evidence.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, oh, I was just gonna say there's so much evidence actually, even outside the Bible, that proves that Jesus did what he did. I mean, of course, it doesn't affirm the divinity of Jesus, but it ultimately it confirms his existence and at least confirms his ministry, right? So
Yeah,
at least you have that, right? You have outside sources, but it's like you don't have any source. The only source is you have the approved source, right? You come to the approved conclusion, the approved source of information, which that's not how scholarship is. That's not how research is done, unfortunately.
yeah, and you can't really
So
do this with Ahnsahnghong, especially when they say how he disappeared, because we're shown,
yeah,
like you said, him going on a train to
yeah,
China.
through
Um,
North Korea apparently, right? Like what Han
yeah,
said in my last video.
it's crazy, bro. And the fact that members don't really like look into this very much, the reality is the guy actually he had a cerebral hemorrhage and he had a stroke. He had a heart attack the day after. There's records of him being in the hospital. There's records of him passing away after his heart attack, and we even have pictures of his tomb where he's buried. Like the guy really never ascended, and I'm pretty sure if someone ascended like that in this age, it would be a pretty damn big deal.
Yeah,
But there's a reason why it's just a fabricated lie.
and to your point, again, that's where they changed definition of words, right? The sacred ascension of Ahnsahnghong, right? But there was no ascension. I mean, if you're gonna say that's an ascension, then guess what? Me and you, Ricardo, we're gonna ascend one day when we're 80, right? I mean, I have bad genes, so maybe you probably have better genes, so you might make it to 90 or 100. But once we go in that 6 feet under, once we go in that cardboard, not cardboard. I hope it's not cardboard. It better not be cardboard. Hope we go in that wooden box. We're gonna ascend, right? Like we already ascended actually at the hospital, right? Which is so they changed the word ascend, right? They take Jesus's ascension, right? They're like, yeah, that's one ascension, but also Ahnsahnghong ascended, right? You never say the sacred death, right?
Yeah.
Of Ahnsahnghong. It's the sacred
Yeah.
ascension, right? So if that's the context, then everybody has ascended. Like it's nothing special. Did you ever experience having to delete or destroy notes that were taken at an education or Bible study? Because I remember one time, like if there's a serious education, they would actually collect phones, so you can't, for whatever reason, you can't take notes, or they used to say something like, "Oh, just you can take notes, but just on the tablet of your heart," right? So why, if it's the truth and you need to preach this to 7 billion people or 8 billion or however many people are, why do you think they need to destroy notes or delete notes, or you can't have phones, or sometimes not even take notes to begin with?
Well, obviously, you're gonna have something written down that might cause them to look bad, in the future. So, for example, if I took notes about the belief that Sangyoja is going to ascend, and never die, if I have actual notes of that, then I have proof that they taught something false. Because whenever she, being a normal human being, unfortunately, her time comes to pass away, then this church is, I'm pretty sure they're gonna be like, no, we never taught that she wasn't gonna face death, and that she was gonna go alive, ascend alive with the 144,000 on the last day. But if you have your notes written down where it clearly says that this is the belief of the World Mission Society Church of God, then that's a pretty heavy, evidence for that. Because I have some notes that, yeah, I look at them and I was like, wow, I can't believe I fell for this. Uh, but yeah, it's just
So,
I think that's
so
why they
did
do
you
it.
ever experience it yourself? Like, did anyone ever come to you and say, "Hey, you need to delete that," or "Hey, you need to destroy that," or "No notes," or something like that? Has that happened to you in the church?
I can't really remember experiencing exactly that, but the part of it was because I wasn't the kind of guy to like put everything out there and like let everyone know what I'm doing, and just kind of like share everything with everyone at all times. I know some people that do that, but I would just kind of like more so kind of do what I believe is uh
Gotcha.
is correct. Yeah, but like I never, I guess I just never gave them a chance like to look into my notes or anything like that. Plus I
Gotcha.
wasn't like on the level of that probably you were, like at the leadership level where you would kind of like you'd be really looked after and you'd be given like pretty strong information at times. Because some of the
Right.
times I would talk to like the leaders there, and they would tell me things that the members, normal members, wouldn't really be aware of.
Yeah, they have no idea. Yeah, no, that's true. I've been in some situations where I'd have to delete my notes and I'd have to prove that I deleted my notes or burnt my notes or whatever the case may be. Um, I've been instructed to give my phone um, to my leader for education purposes. And actually, when you see my Great Light interview, you'll know why that happened. And it's actually our fault of why that education happened. Um, so but yeah, I know, and it's like, is a truthful organization, if you're indeed the truth, I just don't see how you can reconcile this kind of behavior, right? Like if you're the truth and you are God and you are nothing but the truth, it doesn't make sense for you to have to do this. The only reason you would do something like this is if you're hiding something. Like imagine, Ricardo, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I will. Like, hey, let me see your phone. Let me see what you've been buying. Let me see what you've been searching for, Ricardo. Let me see. Like, you're kind of like, whoa, dude, like, chill. Like, who are you? What kind of authority do you have? Like, but you might kind of, but if you get that kind of reaction, it might pitch to some people outside. You might seem you are hiding something, right? Like, oh, well, if you're not hiding anything, you should just hand me your phone, right? You should just hand me, whatever I ask you for, because if you're not hiding anything, you're not doing anything wrong, then why are you freaking out? Why are you acting like this? In the same way, when you when you're asked to delete notes or not take notes or not record or anything, it's like, well, if you're not trying to hide, why are you trying to hide? This doesn't make any sense, and
Yeah, it's
so,
information control right there for you.
and on top of that, the best way to have information control is to have controlled opposition, right? So that's why they have slander websites, right? They have websites that you can go to, and I think it's like the True WMSCOG is one of them. There might be a couple more where they have controlled slander, right? They give you little glimpse of slander, and then their little interpretation of the slander, and so they have controlled opposition as well, right? And that's the total form of information control. It's one thing to just control the negative information, right? But they also control the positive information too. So it's like it's total control. It's not just one or the other, because that's the most effective information control, is controlling both sides, right? Because that's total information control. Um, so moving on here, it's a couple different things I want to get into, but we're kind of running out of time here. One of the things I want to talk about is the Passover, real quick. When you're talking about Passover, how is it important? Like, how important is it? Because some people, even though they might be told about the Passover, to a member in the WCOG, how important is the Passover? And have you ever seen any crazy behavior on the Passover? I guess too. So it's a two-part question, I guess.
Well, if you remember, Passover is like a life or death situation. If you don't keep it, then that's it, man. You're going to hell. So it's a really serious matter. It's like it's the most important day of your year, basically. That's when,
Right.
yeah, the church teaches that that's how everything starts for a member. And yeah, if you're not able to keep it, or if you're told that you can't keep this Passover, then it's like, yeah, it's like being condemned to hell, basically.
It's a death sentence, basically.
Hmm.
So what I find is interesting, and I'll kind of tell you a story about one Passover that is near and dear to my heart. Um,
Hmm.
so Passover of 2021, right? So this is the year after the COVID lockdown. And I was in my townhome in Layton, and we used my house for a church for a number of years. I remember this Passover was in particular because this was the first one that kind of opened up, right? Because the first one was like individual because of COVID, and then 2021 it kind of opened up a little bit. Um, so a little bit of backstory for those who might not be aware of what takes place during the Passover event. It's basically like a communion ceremony, right? But the church teaches a form of transubstantiation. Now, if you're Catholic, you know what that means. But if you're not Catholic, I'll kind of explain. It means that the bread and wine is not just a symbol of what Jesus did, right? It's not just like bread and wine and you just eat it as a remembrance, right? Like most Christians believe. And it's like they literally believe that this literally becomes Jesus' flesh and blood. Not so much so that it is like this ceremony itself has the authority and the power to forgive sin. So basically, it becomes holy and sacred, right? But not only that, but even before you have the bread and wine, even before it's blessed, it becomes Jesus's flesh and blood. They also treat it sacred, right? Because when you get your feet washed, and then you go and get your stamp, and then you go and get the Passover bread and wine, they say do not take it into the bathroom, right? Or don't put it on the floor, or don't put it here. You have to put it, just it's God's flesh and blood. It's holy flesh and blood. You don't mess with it. Basically, don't open it. Don't even look at it. Right? Basically, just leave it alone. Which is funny because it's not even prayed yet. Like if you drop it on the floor, like it's not Jesus' flesh and blood yet. You take it in the bathroom, yeah, it's gross, but it's not Jesus' flesh and blood yet. Like they're already treating it like it is Jesus' flesh and blood. Right. So I think it actually goes above transubstantiation, because I think most Catholics would probably agree that, like if you're taking the bread and wine to the altar, it hasn't been blessed yet, but it spills, you're probably just like, oh, whatever, I'll clean up later, go get some new ones, right? Like it hasn't been blessed yet. It hasn't been sanctified yet. But and so that's just kind of paints how important this day is. Even before it's blessed, it's considered Jesus' flesh and blood already, just by the attitude around it, right? And they're very strict about these rules even before it's blessed. So Passover 2021 comes, right? We're keeping it, and I have kids, right? And anyone who has kids in WMSCOG and Passover comes, you know that day is just a breeding ground for just disaster, right? Kids and the Passover do not go together. So anyway, we were keeping Passover, and I believe it was a video sermon that year. So I want to say so. Doesn't matter. But anyway, so we're all keeping it in the townhome. Kids are upstairs in our big bedroom, right? And because we use our bedrooms for Bible study rooms, and so we go it's in the upstairs big bedroom. The kids are up there keeping the Passover, and the adults are downstairs. And this is like a 1,500 square feet, 2-floor townhome. And as soon as the service was over, I get a call from my wife, and she's like, "Hey, my oldest daughter, she was like 3 at the time, I think, and she calls me and says, "Oh, our daughter spilled the bread, right? She went to grab it to eat it, but kind of crushed it because it's crumbly. It's like a rice bread, right? It's not like normal bread. It's a rice bread, and if you don't do it right, it's kind of crumbly, right? And so she grabbed it and kind of squished it, and it crumbled, and some of the crumbs went like down her. And this is after it's blessed. This is after the service. So some of the crumbs are in her onesie, in her diaper, and on the floor. And so it's just like your worst nightmare. If you're in the WMSCOG, this is your worst nightmare unfolding before your very eyes, because they're very heavy on, if you desecrate this bread and wine in any way, shape, or form, if you don't destroy it by or eat it by midnight, and they have all these fearful rules and expectations of this day and this bread and wine. And because of this, you know what I did? I took off her diaper and started eating like what I thought was like bread pieces. I took off her onesie and started eating what was like, I thought were bread pieces. And we're like trying to pick up what we can. Who knows? It's probably lint or whatever on the carpet, because it's like the same color almost. So it's like impossible to see where these crumbs could possibly be. But to the outside, somebody would be like, "What on earth is happening?" Right? This guy's eating out of his daughter's onesie and diaper, trying to get these little, pieces of bread out of it. And there's the leader who's like searching the floor, trying to pick up all the pieces and stuff. And so what happened was we kind of just were like, well, I think we got everything. And and you feel like if I desecrate this bread, or this bread expires and it's still in my house, like I'm going to hell, right? Because they teach that basically, if you desecrate this bread and wine, you're done, right? And so I remember this year, and so we have this diaper that's still full of probably crumbs and stuff. So we're like, well, I don't want to eat any more out of it. Like we don't even know. Like, so what the instruction was to find a clean tree and bury it under a clean tree. Now, what is a clean tree? We had no idea. So, and this is like 10 o'clock ish. And so my leader, after we finished cleaning Zion, took a garbage bag, like a yeah, took a garbage bag, put the diaper in it, tied it off, drove to his house, and this is like probably 10, 11 o'clock at night. And this is like in the middle of March, I believe. And he had to find a tree in his backyard to dig a hole under said tree. In Utah, it's I mean there's ice on the ground, like the ground is cement, right? It's not soft whatsoever. And so he spent the good part of the night burying my daughter's diaper under a clean tree. But it's like, but that's the kind of things that when you start believing this stuff, you're just like, that just seemed normal, right? Like that's the thing to do, right? That's the head office instruction. Like that is just what you do, right? And people might say, well, they never told you to eat out of the diaper or something. That's true. I was never told to eat out of the diaper, right? But because of my reverence for the bread and wine, I was like, I gotta eat it, right? I don't want my daughter to be cursed because of me, I don't want to be cursed, like, so because they have this heavy-handed thing about Passover. So yeah, I wasn't told to eat it out of the diaper, of course, but that was just my reverent mind for it. It was just doing that. So that's
You,
my crazy Passover story.
I would say, uh, you sound insane.
Yeah.
I would say
No, I am.
they did tell you to do what you did, like to eat out of it, basically to like just indirectly, There's a lot of things that
Yeah.
are said in there are said indirectly. So you just gotta catch the hint, basically. Um,
Yeah.
that's a pretty yeah. You sound insane, man. Just by saying that, like it sounds like something out of a movie or something. Like It's crazy. But one thing I want to say regarding the Passover feast is we kept, I believe, the 2020 Passover at home, and then the 2021
Yeah.
Passover, we went back to the church. That Passover, we were told that only the people who had been given money to the church, so tithing, they were the ones allowed to actually keep the Passover. Anyone who wasn't tithing, they can't. They can't this year. It's like
Yep.
mother's rule or something. So basically,
Gates of heaven are closing.
anyone who wasn't giving part of their check to the WMSCOG didn't really get to have salvation that year.
But you don't buy salvation though in the WMSCOG. See,
I mean,
that's another
that looks like
oxymoron, right?
buying salvation to me, bro.
Yeah, that's like another oxymoron from just that, right? Like partial fulfillment, then it's not a fulfillment, right?
Looks like you,
Unconditional love,
yeah,
not conditional, right? Like it's another one of those just play on words where it's just like if you know, you know, if you don't, you don't. Right? Have you heard that?
yeah. And their excuse would be like, well, those people aren't saved anyways, because like they're not tithing, so they're cursed by God, you know? Well, at least that's the
Yeah.
belief of this church. So why does it matter if we don't let them keep the Passover? And it's just like, to me, that's just cruel, man.
Yeah. No, I agree. It's definitely overseer. It's
Shows
definitely
it shows what's important for this organization.
yeah, it's definitely overreaching 100%. But
And
that's what's to be expected.
I want to say also like the reason why like they make it so dramatic and like they make it so important for you to finish this whole little piece of bread and this tiny amount of wine is so that there's an emotional connection to it and you're like really invested into it, so you take it seriously, you know. I think that's why they
Yeah,
do it.
I think so too. Because they're really heavy on the faith, right? Like if you don't accept the body of Christ, like you don't believe in the body of Christ, you eat and drink judgment on yourself, right? So they use a biblical verse, but they take it out of context to apply to what they're trying to do, which a lot of these groups do. Um, Moving on, in the WMSCOG, everything outside of the WMSCOG was pagan, right? For instance, if you were preaching, and I'll ask you this and you can give me a response, but for instance, if you were preaching, and let's say it's December, and somebody hands you preaching, sorry, let's say it's the middle of December, you're preaching like Christmas time, and somebody hands you a plate of Christmas cookies, what are you going to do?
Probably get rid of them, give them to someone else, or I wouldn't eat them if I was in the cult because
Right, because they teach food sacrifice to idols, right? Like,
yeah,
but they don't say what that is really, right? They just say, well, whatever we say it is, it is. But they never come to the conclusion logically. Like, for instance, is it the shape of the cookie that makes it pagan? Well, no, that's nonsense. Okay, is it the color of icing on the cookie that makes it pagan? No, that's nonsense. Is it because they hand you some sugary snack, a cookie on a specific day of the year? Is that the issue? Well, not really. It's like, okay, so you can't eat anything on Christmas because then you're you're eating food sacrificed to idols. Well, no, I can eat stuff. Okay, so what's the problem? Like, what's the problem? Is it the mixture of sugar and flour and icing? Is that what's gonna curse you by God? Or like, but they never come to that logical conclusion. They never stop and think like, what is it that makes it bad? Right? Like somebody's giving me a cookie, right? Like even didn't Jesus say that it's not what goes in a person that makes you unclean, it's what comes out, right? Obviously, like your actions, your heart, your words.
right.
Um, and so it's funny to me because it's just they never it's like one of those things where it's again according to your faith, right? That's what I hear all the time. Like, hey, I accidentally ate this Christmas cookie, right? Or so what do I do? Oh, it's according to your faith, you know. Or I remember one time this brother brought in a Coke and it had a Santa Claus on it, but no, it's fine, right? We didn't get any no issue with that, right? That's fine because we love Coke, right? But it's just there's so many disconnects where let me tell you what we did, right? So a lot of times when Christmas comes around, our family for years would give us Christmas presents, right? But because we didn't want to be considered pagan and we didn't want to receive the mark of the beast as they would teach, what we would do is we would go and return the gifts, get the money for the gifts, tithe off the money, and then go and buy the same gift, right? The same gift again, because that was our method of unpaganizing it. But it's the same day, it's the same product, and it's just, but you never stop and think like, what difference does this make? Right? It's the same product, same day, but that's the amount of mental gymnastics we would have to go through in order to accept a gift from somebody on that day. But they never really tell you why you can't, right? They say, "Oh, it's the mark of the beast. Oh, it's pagan." Why? What makes it pagan? Somebody comes and drops off a gift to you December 26th. Is it fine? Like, is it the mere act of, I don't know, somebody coming and bringing you a gift? Is that pagan? Well, no. Okay, is it the day of year? Like, okay, so every year this day comes and you're a pagan just automatically because the day itself is pagan. Well, no. Okay, so what's the problem? Right? Like, what, like, are they doing? They're like, hey, this is from a pagan god. Here, take it. This pagan god gave this to you, made it for you, for you. And it's a religious item. Like, that doesn't happen, right? Like, it's, you never stop and think, okay, well, what is the problem here? Like, you never think logically, what is the issue here? Right? Like, why is it pagan? Why? Please tell me. You can't just throw pagan out all the time and just expect people to understand what you're talking about. Like, oh, it's pagan. Oh, how? What makes it pagan? Right? Like, it's just, but that's the kind of mental gymnastics you have to go through. And I'll say for the family members, this is actually a really important part. So if you're a family member and you have people inside of this church, I would say one thing that would help immensely is please don't give them Christmas presents. I know you're trying to make a point. I know you're trying to help, right, by throwing it in their, they take it as you throwing it in their face, right? Because they've told you, I'm sure, that they don't celebrate Christmas and that they have their reasons for not. The thing the cult banks on is for you to avoid, is for you to intrude and give them Christmas presents regardless. Because then it puts them in a very awkward situation to where they have to do like what I just described. Like, we'd get Christmas presents from our parents, and we're just like, oh my gosh, like, please just don't, like, because now we have to go and return it and then tithe on the money and then buy it again, and because we don't want to make, we don't want to throw it away, but at the same time we can't use it. So that's what you're doing every time you give Christmas presents to your believing, your people in the church that are your family. That's what's going through their mind. So it's actually creating more separation the more you do that. So I would just recommend avoid giving them things on those days. If you want to give them something, just give it to them on a day that's not what they consider pagan. I know it sounds ridiculous and I know it sounds nonsensical, but that will just get rid of that separation that they've already put in the family, because then you're helping them as opposed to being a burden to them, because that's what it will be seen, even though it's out of your good nature and it's a good thing. It is, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but that's just how they're going to receive it is, you know, they're just going to see it as an inconvenience, and they're going to see it as a, oh, they never listen, and um I don't know, do you have anything to say on that, Ricardo?
Yeah, I think if you want to be a consistent member of the World Mission Society Church of God, you're gonna have to give up your ability to use common sense and just kind of go with what the church tells you, even though it doesn't really make sense. Another thing
Yeah.
is they say this like that all other religions are pagan is because they've created a dependency uh, on them. So you need them to be saved. But if you can find any other kind of valid practice of faith in any other church, then you're just gonna go to that church because why not? So now there goes a constant check away from them, a check that they would have received week by week if you were just still a member. So
Yeah.
they really just wanna have you. They want you to think that it's either all or nothing. So you're either like super invested in this one and only true church and hate all the others, or you're just not part of this church at all and you're a pagan. That's
Yeah.
how I see it used in here.
Yeah. Any way they can create separation, they will. And kind of to explain how their mind works is basically this, like, of course you're allowed to ask questions. Here's the list of approved questions you may ask, right? Um, you're absolutely free to study and investigate freely without restraint. Here's the list of approved sources for study, right? Or we're not trying to stifle thought. We're not trying to make you not think. We want you to learn everything as long as you come to the same conclusion we want you to, right? This is kind of how their brain works. Um, but when you're in it, you kind of think, oh, that makes sense. But when you're out, you're like, that's not how research is done. That's not how anyone really functions in reality. Um, and what I would say too, kind of moving on here, because we'll probably wrap this up here in a few minutes. The difference between a healthy Christian church and a cult is, I believe, checks and balances, right? What you find is in cults, there is no checks and balances. You have a supreme leader who is without a fault, right? You have no say in leadership. You have no say in anything that the organization has. There's no transparency. There's no hearing both sides of every story. There's no, there's they control information, they control communication, they control doctrine, they control leadership, they control money without transparency, without restriction. All of this without restriction and full authority. That the difference between, because people will say, well, every Christian church is a cult. The Bible is a cult. So they throw the word cult out like it's candy. No, that's not the case, because even you see in scripture, you see apostles being contentious with each other, challenging each other, researching. Paul opposes Peter because he was in the wrong, right? Bible teaches we test all the prophecies, we test all the spirits, we test all the teachings, right? Like, so Christians are, the only, I mean, not to say the only religion, but normal Christian churches want you to research. They want you to search. They want you to find facts. They want you to dive into it, right? So I would say there's a big difference between a church and a cult, because the reality is it's checks and balances, right? Um, can you fire your leader? Is transparency encouraged, right? Are you allowed to have a say in what's going on in the church? Like things that matter, not just, oh, should we paint this? Or should we decorate that? No, like actual things, like financial decisions. Do you even know where your money's going, right? Are you allowed, if you see something that maybe your leader is like kind of shady and sinful, and you know, are you allowed to call him out? Are you allowed to fire him and say he has no business being in leadership? Just like Paul was, talking to Peter and all these other things, right? Because that matches scripture, right? The scriptures teach, of course, we believe in God, but there's also checks and balances in the church for that reason. And you can see it all through the New Testament. There are checks and balances. So that's the difference between a cult. If there is no checks and balances in your church, obviously you're in a cult. And I also wanted, since we're
Yeah.
on the subject of cults, I want to
Wait,
read
can I mention
something.
something real quick?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah, let me just
Um,
get this here.
continuing on what you just spoke, I think that's why when they were creating this church, when General Pastor and all the other Koreans were getting together after the passing of Ahnsahnghong, the sudden passing of him, who nobody was expecting, they what I would imagine is they basically got together and said, all right, how are we going to continue this thing that we have right here, this money making belief or religion. And basically, what I think is they just decided to go with some form of unfallible figure, So they decided to come up with God the Mother, so nobody would question her. Oh,
Yeah,
because she's God, so why are you gonna have doubts or ask like question her authority or anything she says for that matter. So I think that's very
yeah,
strategically done in order to have no one basically question anything that they do. And if you question something, they look at you like, oh my God, brother Ricardo's having doubts. It's weak faith.
yeah. Again, there's no checks and balances, right? There's no, hey, let's get to the conclusion of your answer and let's figure this out. Let's be on the same page. It's, oh, you have a question? Little faith. And I have a lot of faith because I shaved before coming on here. So my faith is great, by the way. Um, I see you too, Ricardo shaved. So that means your faith is great as well. So I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
So
Um,
day of
so
the Lord.
exactly. So to those who think, well, even if you're right, there should be checks and balances in the church. We're different because we have God, right? So we're different. We're not a cult because we have God. Yeah, we might have cult-like tendencies according to you, but we have God, so we're different than these other cults. Okay, well, let's examine that for a minute, right? I'm going to read from, it's called onlineutpd.edu. The link will be in the description for this article. I recommend reading it. It's called The Psychology of Cults, and it lists off a couple of cults. I'm just going to read it real quick. The Manson family. Charles Manson directed his family of runaways and other troubled individuals to start a race war by murdering several people in Los Angeles. There were 8 victims in all, including a pregnant Hollywood actress, Sharon Tate, but the group claimed to have murdered and disposed of the bodies of many more. The Sullivanians, perhaps less known than some other cults, yet one that operated virtually in the open in Manhattan's upscale Upper West Side. This group began as a psychoanalytical, sorry, I can't read that, institute in the 1950s, but evolved into a coercive sex cult that lasted for decades and counted famous artists among its memberships. The People's Temple. Reverend Jim Jones ran the People's Temple in several California locations before moving the congregation to Guyana and establishing the Jonestown community. The temple's methods came under increasing scrutiny, and upon an unwelcome visit from a U.S. congressman, Jones ordered his congregation to drink flavored aid, often misattributed to Kool-Aid, laced with Valium and cyanide. Many victims were children, and many adults were forced at gunpoint. More than 900 people died that day. Heaven's Gate. Marshall Applewhite, leader of Heaven's Gate, was convinced that an extraterrestrial spacecraft was hiding behind the recently discovered Hale-Bopp comet, that members of his group would be taken to a higher level of existence by that spacecraft following their deaths. As the comet passed close to the Earth, 39 members of the Heaven's Gate drank vodka mixed with uh, phenobarbital, placed plastic bags over their heads, and died. Nexum. Outwardly a self-help organization, Nexum was secretly a sex cult assaulting women, branding the initials of the founder, Keith Raniere, on them and blackmailing them. The organization operated partly on a pyramid scheme structure, with masters recruiting slaves who would eventually recruit more slaves as subordinates. The case also drew attention for the involvement of Smallville actress Allison Mack, who recruited women for Raniere. Good news. Hundreds of members of the Kenya-based Good News International Church willingly starved to death at the direction of their leader, Paul, I'm not going to pronounce his middle name, it's Paul McKenzie, who himself abstained from the slow suicide. So basically, he told people to starve himself, but he didn't. McKenzie claimed to have determined the date at which the world would end, and purportedly wanted his followers to go to heaven in advance of the apocalypse. Right? Obviously, this is just a handful of lists of these different cults that have been very destructive in recent history. But so obviously we would be here all day just listing off these groups. But I guess my question is, okay, you say you have God and you're not a cult because you have God. You're different than all these other organizations, right? But what's stopping this organization that you're a part of from turning into one of these groups? Right? Like, you might say, well, mother or my leader will never let that happen. Okay, fair enough, but what if it does? Right? What if it does come to that conclusion? In my opinion, this is my opinion, I really hope it doesn't. I really hope it doesn't. But to be fair, no one that joined these groups that we just mentioned, no one joined these groups knowing that what would happen to them was going to happen to them. Right? They joined because they were love bombed, they were indoctrinated, they were manipulated unknowingly. I mean, obviously these groups don't come up and are like, hey, you want to drink the Kool-Aid? Hey, you want to not eat and possibly pass away in a few days? Hey, you want to join a crazy, I mean, obviously there's very depraved behavior, but no one comes up and says these things, right? So for someone to be like, well, this would never happen to me, that's exactly what these people probably thought, right? But do you think if they knew what the end result would be that they would have joined? Right? Like if you heard somebody was in the Manson family or the People's Temple or Nixon, wouldn't you try and help and get them out and be like, hey, you're following something that's not good. It's disruptive. It's going to destroy you. Um, but again, like these people don't these people don't join because they think they're destructive cults. They get manipulated, brainwashed, and then eventually, when they come to the realization, if they ever come to the realization that it is a dangerous cult, most of the time it's too late, right? When you're and this is what I want to ask you, the viewer. If you're a WMSCOG viewer by chance watching this, if Mother told you to drink the Kool-Aid, would you? Right? What if one year on Passover the doors get locked and they're like no one leaves until the Passover is partaken of, right? Or what if Mother told you to take someone out? Would you? Or what if Mother told you to assault somebody? Or what if Mother told you to hurt yourself, right? Would you? I mean, you already believe that you're not worth anything, and that you know, you don't deserve anything, and you're the worst, and you just need to follow God and follow God blindly, like Abraham, who offered his son. I mean, they indoctrinate you with these kind of teachings, right? I'm not saying you're radicalized, but I guess it's just, you know, what is stopping this organization from turning bad? Because you might say, well, it hasn't happened yet, but what if it happens? Is it too late? Right? Because most of the times these people find out way too late what they were following. And I don't want this to happen to anybody else, because if you're saying yes to these questions, yes, no matter what, Mother, right? I'll do. What's the difference between you and what we just read off this article? Like, you say you're not in a cult, you say you're not in a dangerous cult, but nobody thinks they're in a dangerous cult. That's why they're in it. If they were in it, they would have left, right? Like me and you, right? Like we woke up, we're like, whoa, what are we doing? Right? So if you answer yes to, oh, well, if Mother said, then yeah, I'm in. Then what's the difference between this group and these groups that we just read? I mean, obviously these other groups ended horribly. Thankfully, it hasn't happened. Um, but seriously, like, what's to say it won't? Right? If history gives us a reason, it's like, look at what has happened in the past. Right? Educate yourself. Don't let history repeat itself. Educate yourself so that way you learn from history. You learn from other people's unfortunate demises. I mean, of course, I'm not saying this will happen. I'm not saying that at all. But what I'm saying is, how do you know you will? How do you know you will not stop if Mother asks you to do something crazy? Right? Like, how do you know? Right? It hasn't happened yet, thank God. But seriously, like, how do you know? What makes you different than these other groups that we just talked about? So that would just be my challenge for the people watching, because again, some of the leaders don't do this stuff, right? Like the leaders themselves remain this holy, pure being. They make the leaders under them that they have appointed do these kind of things, right? Like they don't act alone. So you might say, well, my leader would never let this happen. But most of the time in these cases, the leaders that are appointed by the founders, right? So not the founders of these groups themselves, but the leaders, like the Manson family. He didn't do a thing. He didn't kill anybody. It was his followers, right? That group in Kenya that we just, or what was it? Kenya? Yeah, the Kenya-based one. All of his followers starved to death. He didn't, right? So a lot of the time, these leaders too, they're so indoctrinated and they have so much going in these organizations. They have so much stored up in these organizations that they are willing to do whatever, because you might go to your leader and say, well, you would never let this happen, right? These leaders are far more in it than you are. They have far more to lose leaving the cult than you do. So, and they're more willing to do anything, right? Because that's why they're in that position. If they weren't going to do everything that this leader said, they wouldn't be in those positions, right? Like it defeats the purpose. So it's a very dangerous and slippery slope. So that's why when people say this is a dangerous cult, you're like, well, look at these dangerous cults here that I just read. Like we're nothing like that. Yeah, they were nothing like that in the beginning either, until they progressed and progressed and progressed and progressed. And over time, stuff happens, right? And it's just, I worry that these people, they wake up too late, right? And I pray to God, again, I hope this never happens. I don't think it will happen, but it's just, why take the chance? why test it? Why even try it? Why take the chance? Just, so that's something that I'd encourage anyone who's in the WMSCOG. It's like just really think about it. Just really think about what I'm saying. Like I have nothing to lose or gain from you leaving the WMSCOG. I have nothing, right? It doesn't affect me one way or the other. But I just worry about you and your family. That's all I'm saying. Just think about it for a minute. And just hear me out on this. Ricardo, do you have anything to say on that?
Oh yeah, I think it's a good point, like what you're talking about, and I think you explained it very well, but there's a missing element right there. It's not only how these people ended, but what they were constantly going through while in the church. And yeah,
Yeah,
maybe something like that, like such a scandal of that magnitude hasn't happened in this church, but there's been things that have been happened. People have suffered. People have been ridiculed. People have been abused. People have been sexually abused in this organization. But of course, they're gonna try to put everything under the rug and say that they're, the perfect church or whatever, however they want to call themselves. But in reality, people are suffering and they're giving up their lives for this organization, and this organization is ruining their members' lives in so many ways. They affected my life. They took 7 years of my life where I didn't live in peace and I wasn't comfortable and I wasn't happy and I wasn't fulfilled with life. And that's already a tragedy if you think about it. I didn't, I mean, I was suicidal while I was in the church, especially when I was leaving, because, well, if I'm leaving, if I don't have any truth and I don't have a relationship with God, you might as well be dead. If you're a true, if God and like, and your spiritual life matters so much to you. Fortunately, um, I was revealed the true gospel, and and my and I was able to have now I'm able to have true hope for heaven and true faith in our God. But that wasn't the case while I was in the cult. And I see a lot of people suffering. Even though they're not ending their lives, they're really not living their lives either. And they're dead inside. So
right.
yeah, it's a good point, like what you're saying, maybe nothing like that has happened, but a lot of bad things are happening right now. Um
Yeah,
and it's sad, who knows what's gonna happen when Zhang Yojia passes away, and I don't know what their members are gonna do. I don't know what they're gonna be instructed to do because now God is apparently dying.
and
So
it's their fault. You know that's going to be pinned on them because everything to this point has been pinned on them. Failing of the end of the world, right? We didn't bear enough fruit. We didn't like everything is pinned on the members. So of
on the
course they're going to
members,
find a way to pin this on the members. You didn't do enough, so mother, passed away or whatever the case may be. And it's just like there's so much more to the story that if you would just open up your mind and just open up what someone else is trying to tell you. Because if the truth is the truth, it will stand up to the most extremist of scrutinies. You have nothing to worry about. And falsehood will trip over itself, right? Like if me and Ricardo are lying about any of this, it will be revealed, right? Like we will be called out. It will be revealed, right? We have nothing. I mean, it will. But if it's true, if what you're believing in is true, then it means the more you research, the more you should come to that conclusion, right? The more you'll see through the fallacies. So, um, so I guess I have a lot more questions, but we'll probably just end it here because this is getting a long video. Do you have any last maybe words for anyone, or have we basically said it all? Or
you ask too much questions, man.
I know,
That's why you're
that's
not a
what
member.
I know. My bad.
No, I'm just playing with you.
We'll do a
No,
part
those were
two.
really, yeah, yeah, I'm down. But those were really good questions, Adam. Hopefully, it sparked some curiosity in the members and made them think a little bit. Whoever's watching this, just want to let you know that I'm not against you in any way, shape, or form. I love you, and I want you to come out of that place because it's not good for you. It's not good for you spiritually, mentally, emotionally, physically. There's a lot of ways in which you're being harmed, and you're really missing out on a lot. So
Yeah,
I'm doing this for you. Um, I would just want you to do your proper research, which a lot of the times we're not given the chance to do in this organization,
yeah,
and it affects people. So
yeah,
um, hopefully, this is gonna help out someone, and hopefully, people will come to their senses just like we were able to.
Yeah.
And I can honestly say that my life has improved tenfold from the time I've been out. It's amazing. Like you're free, and
Yeah.
I'm not living wild out here, just doing whatever I want. And
Yeah.
if
We're normal
anything, I'm
people
more
living normal lives.
yeah. If anything, I'm more connected to God than when I was I mean, when I was in the cold, I wasn't even close to God at all. Even it was only an illusion.
Yeah.
But now it's real, and it feels amazing, honestly.
Yeah.
So I really don't have any complaints post cold life, but the only thing is, it really hurts that none of the members are willing to interact with me in any way, shape, or form after they profess their love to me for 7 years. But you could
Yeah.
just see that it wasn't really authentic. They were just saying it because they were told to say it, so that
Yeah.
so that I would have an emotional anchor in the church. But truth
Yeah.
prevails.
Yeah. And I think that's a good place to end it, honestly. I think we've said a lot. Maybe we'll do a part two here in the next few weeks if you're up for it. But my email, if even if you just want to talk, as always, we're open books. I'll leave Ricardo's information in the description. Obviously, mine will be in the description. And if you just want to talk and even vent and just tell your story, and even just behind closed doors, if you just need someone to talk to, just let us know. And I hope this is effective too. And honestly, just God bless everybody. And I hope everyone's living their best life. And I hope everyone's happy. And I hope everyone's healthy. Number one, too. So yeah, thank you for watching. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe and do all that good stuff. And we'll catch you on the part two.